Welcome. I am Garps1234 and you clicked my video. This novel is Dao of Money by Extra26. Link in the description to support the author and on to the video.
Chapter 11. Esoteric daos. When Chen Ren first found himself in the cultivation world, he'd entertained a few fantasies about what his path might look like. Would he become a sword-wielding prodigy, cleaving through sect rivals gracefully and skillfully? Or perhaps he'd find his calling in the intricate arts of arrays, mastering their complexities to shape the battlefield. And, like any man might in this strange, mystical world, he briefly considered the idea of amassing a harem. After all, that seemed to be a common theme in stories about powerful cultivators. But making noodles? He'd definitely never expected that to be where he ended up. Yet, here he was, running a noodle stall that had, in just a week, become the talk of the marketplace. Every day, a steady stream of customers came by, drawn by the novelty of an Eastern delicacy that no one else in the region was offering. It wasn't just the taste of the noodles that brought them in. Chen Ren's marketing tactics had spread his name throughout the streets like wildfire. Free samples, word of mouth from his customers, and the curious spectacle of his stall with the long queue had made it impossible for anyone to miss it. The man selling noodles, a dish unfamiliar to most, stood out even among the countless food vendors. And then there were the kids. Chen Ren had never been one to encourage child labor, but in this case, he saw it differently. The group of street children who helped him were hungry, and for them, assisting with his stall wasn't about earning coins. It was about earning a meal. According to them, there had been days when they hadn't eaten at all. Though Chen Ren hadn't lived a life on the streets, he understood enough to sympathize with them. The thought of them going hungry left a bitter taste in his mouth, and he saw this as a way to offer them something better, however small it might be. Over the days, he'd gotten to know the kids better. The leader of the group was a girl named Mei Lin, small but fierce, with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. She was the one who had organized the others, making sure they didn't cause too much trouble around the stall. The boys followed her lead. Chun, the quiet one who always worked the hardest. Bo, who often tried to sneak extra noodles when he thought no one was looking. And Jian, the smallest but the one with the loudest laugh. Thanks to his noodle business, the kids seemed to be in far better shape now. Their cheeks looked a little less hollow, and their energy had doubled, quite the difference from when he'd first met them. From selling 60 bowls of noodles a day, Chen Ren's business had doubled. He now dished out 120 bowls, sometimes barely keeping up with the demand. The small pot he used to cook noodles wasn't enough anymore, and every morning, he had to haul back 20 pounds of noodles just to meet the appetites of his growing customer base. It wasn't just the number of bowls sold that had increased, his profit margins did too. All the ingredients were cheap, and thanks to a little bit of ingenuity, and the connections he had through Tangxilan, Chen Ren had managed to cut costs even further. Vegetables, which should have eaten into his profits, were basically free compared to the other costs. Tang Clan regularly bought high-quality vegetables to serve to guests, but often, the excess went unused and would have spoiled if no one ate it. He figured he was doing them a favor by taking the leftovers off their hands. With the vegetables thrown into the mix, the noodles appealed more, and even when they cost more, there was a steady base of customers who were willing to pay for them. Still, despite his booming business, the road to clearing his debts was long. Feng Ming's threat had not disappeared, and even if Chen Ren managed to sell 120 bowls every single day for the next 2 months and save every last copper coin, he still wouldn't be able to pay off everything. But that wasn't the point. The fact that he'd gotten this far at all was something worth celebrating. It was a start, a damn good one at that. His noodle stall was only going to get bigger and better, proving that his earthly knowledge could, in fact, give him an edge in this world. This world wasn't just about swords and qi, he thought to himself with a small smirk. Sometimes, noodles could prove to be effective, too. There was something else, too. Despite being busy from dawn until dusk with the noodle stall, Chen Ren couldn't help but notice that his cultivation had improved. Just a week had passed since his breakthrough, but it felt like he had already made progress. It wasn't much, but the flow of qi in his core was smoother, more natural. It was as if, somehow, the act of running his business was feeding into his cultivation. As I said before, Progressing in one's Dao helps advance one's cultivation. The familiar voice of the cat echoed in his mind, a sly purr lacing her words. Since you're working on your stall, making money every day, you're progressing your Dao, and that's why you're seeing these changes in your cultivation. Chen Ren frowned, considering her words. He'd heard about martial daos before, but no matter how much he thought about Dao of Money, it felt like something completely different than those. Far more powerful even. So, you're saying my cultivation's improving because I'm selling noodles? Yes, that's what I'm saying, the cat confirmed, her tone nonchalant. But I've never seen such a Dao in my lifetime. It's an esoteric Dao, something I don't quite understand. Chen Ren's frown deepened at that. Esoteric Dao? Yes, the cat continued, her voice tinged with frustration as if she was explaining something common. Esoteric Daos are unconventional paths. They pop up every so often, but they're rare. Few practitioners of these Daos ever make a name for themselves because they don't follow the usual paths, like swordsmanship or alchemy. The last one I heard about was a century ago. Some guy managed to merge to the Dao of farming. I think he had a giant chicken that guarded his barn and annihilated a few sections. He blinked. A giant chicken? That's right, she purred, amusement bubbling in her voice. He and the chicken wiped out entire sects that tried to mess with him. At least that's the rumor that traveled to my ears. So, while these esoteric Daos aren't common, they can be powerful in their own way. He briefly moved his eyes away from her and watched the stall. His eyes drifted over the crowd. Business was booming, and his plan to expand was coming together. But it wasn't just the money that interested him anymore. To his eyes, all these people seemed as if they were giant balls of qi, his to claim. So, it means the more money I make from my stall, the more I'll progress in my cultivation? He asked, his voice echoing in his mind, aimed at the cat who was in the process of stretching her body after half of a day just lying around. The cat's voice responded in his head, her tone unimpressed. Not exactly. You'll progress for a while, but it'll get harder. You'll hit a point where the stall alone won't be enough. She flicked her tail lazily. Even in martial daos, you can't just rely on the same moves forever. You have to learn new techniques, face new challenges, or do something meaningful to advance. It's the same for you, whatever you're calling this Dao. Money Dao? Business Dao? Noodle Dao? She chuckled softly in his head. Either way, just selling noodles won't be enough in the long run. So, you're saying I'll need more businesses than just this noodle stall to keep progressing? That's exactly what I'm saying, Yalan purred, her voice amused. It gets harder, not easier. Eventually, the stall won't cut it, and you'll have to find new ways to challenge yourself. Even the best cooks can't give the same dish to their master every day. They will lose their heads if they do so. Chen Ren's eyes flicked to Xiaolan, who was handing out bowls of noodles to another satisfied customer. She was running things smoothly, which was good because it gave him time to think. The cat's words made sense. He had already been considering expanding beyond the stall. While it was fun to grow his little operation from nothing into something more substantial, like a business empire, McDonald's of the cultivation world, he knew it wouldn't be enough. He had no intention of making his entire life revolve around selling noodles, even if it was turning out to be a surprising success. I was anyway thinking about making new things. Despite having magical kung fu, the common population severely lacks things that could make life easier, Chen Ren thought to himself. The idea of having multiple ventures appealed to him. There were too many opportunities in this world to ignore. Plus, if his cultivation was tied to his business success, why not expand? He wasn't going to limit himself. As his thoughts shifted, another nagging memory came to the surface, the dragon. He hadn't asked Yalan about it yet, not since the day the dragon first appeared. It had vanished just as quickly as it had come, leaving him with questions that had been clawing at him for a week now. The dragon hadn't reappeared, but he couldn't get it out of his head. I should probably ask about the dragon, he thought, but just as the question was about to form in his mind, movement at the front of the stall caught his attention. The line was moving up, but instead of another customer, a man in a guard's uniform stepped forward, disregarding the long line completely. Chen Ren's eyes looked over the man, taking in the details. He was broad-shouldered, standing a little taller than most, with a rough stubble covering his square jaw. His uniform was well worn, the kind of attire that had seen its fair share of dirty work. His eyes were sharp, but there was something off in the way he looked down at Chen Ren, like he was sizing him up. Chen Ren stepped forward, his voice light. "Do you need some noodles?" The guard didn't respond right away, his gaze lingering on Chen Ren for just a moment too long, as if they were locked in some kind of silent contest of will. Chen Ren raised his eyebrows, wondering if this was about to turn into some strange show of strength. But before he could speak again, the guard's voice rumbled low. "I've gotten a tip that you don't have the license to open a stall here," the guard said, looking around at the people whose attention slowly started to shift towards them. Chen Ren opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the guard slammed his fist down on the edge of the stall. The wooden surface shook under the force of the blow, sending one of the bowls teetering dangerously. But before it could fall, Chen Ren's reflexes kicked in, and he caught the bowl mid-fall, placing it safely back on the counter. "I do have a permit," Chen Ren said calmly, his eyes narrowing as he met the guard's gaze. The guard scoffed. "Where is it, then?" Chen Ren reached into his robes, his fingers brushing against the familiar texture of parchment as he pulled out the permit. The paper had a slight crinkle to it, a sign of its frequent use over the past few days. He had prepared for this exact scenario, knowing that in a city like this, a rising business was bound to attract some unwanted attention. With a calmness that he didn't feel on the inside, he extended the permit to the guard. The man snatched it with deliberate slowness, his eyes scanning the document as if trying to find something, anything, that could be used against the stall. His lips twitched slightly as he read the details, and the crease in his brow deepened, betraying his frustration. "It's a new one," the guard muttered, his voice carrying an edge that suggested he was searching for a reason to doubt. Chen Ren didn't flinch. His expression remained neutral, though a small smirk threatened to tug at the corner of his lips. "The stall is new too," he replied coolly, his gaze unwavering. The guard's eyes flicked up from the permit, locking onto Chen Ren's face. "I've heard you're selling some kind of Eastern delicacy," he said, his tone dripping with suspicion. "Is that true, or are you faking it?" For the first time, Chen Ren's brows lightly knitted together. Faking it? Yes, he was doing that, but the guard had no reason to care about that. His voice was firm as he responded, "I got it from the East. You don't see anyone else selling noodles like mine, do you?" He leaned in slightly, his gaze narrowing. "And even if it were fake, I didn't hear any regulation about false advertising. Did I miss that section in the guidelines?" The guard opened his mouth, clearly ready to argue the point, but he faltered once he saw Chen Ren's sharp gaze. "There is," he began, his words trailing off uncertainty. Chen Ren seized the opportunity. "There isn't," he said, his voice sharp but calm. "I read the guidelines thoroughly. I even asked the clerk who issued me the permit. There's nothing in there about false advertising. So if you want to accuse me of something, make sure you're ready for the consequences. And remember," his voice dropped slightly, "I'm not a mortal." The guard's eyes widened ever so slightly, the shift in Chen Ren's tone clearly unsettling him. His gaze flicked downward, taking in Chen Ren's robes. For the first time, he seemed to truly notice the fine quality of the fabric, the noticeable patterns woven into it. His expression changed, the initial aggression fading into something more cautious. Without another word, the guard handed the permit back, his movements stiff. "I'll be keeping an eye on the stalls from now on," he muttered, the earlier bluster gone from his voice. "Don't do anything shady." Chen Ren simply nodded, watching as the guard turned and walked away, his back a little too rigid, his steps a little too quick. The tension in the air seemed to lift slightly as the man disappeared into the crowd. He let out a long, measured sigh, the weight of the interaction slipping off his shoulders. What was that about? Xiaolan's voice broke through the moment, and Chen Ren turned to see her standing nearby, her brow furrowed in confusion. "My first guess was a bribe," Chen Ren said, shaking his head slightly, "but he didn't ask for anything when we were talking, never even hinted at it. I think it's more than that." Xiaolan's frown deepened. "More than that? What do you mean?" Chen Ren's gaze flicked toward the spot where the guard had stood moments ago. He didn't take anything from any other stall. Not even a glance in their direction. He came straight to us. And then he left, just like that. He probably wanted to cause trouble for any little thing he could find, but got scared once he realized I'm a cultivator. He was aiming for us specifically. That's bad news, Shalon said softly. She crossed her arms, a frown settling on her brow as she considered Chen Ren's words. Do you think someone is targeting us? Potentially, Chen Ren replied, his voice steady. He leaned against the stall, gazing out at the bustling crowd that had formed, the scent of his freshly made noodles wafting through the air. After all, we did get big in such a short amount of time. People are bound to be jealous of a growing rival business. It's human nature. Now we need to think about who might be out there trying to get us and prepare for whatever comes our way. Shalon nodded, something akin to caution glinting in her eyes as she returned to her tasks, deftly arranging bowls and garnishing the noodles with fresh herbs. But before Chen Ren could delve further into his thoughts, a familiar voice piped up from his mind. This seems annoying, but I've seen it a lot before. He nodded his hands together and stared at the dissolving crowd, thinking of what Yalan had just said. Where have you seen this? The cat's voice was almost nonchalant, as always, yet there was an undercurrent of seriousness. I was part of a sect once. You wouldn't believe how much infighting there was whenever a talented individual rose to prominence. People who felt threatened by that talent would either try to pull them into their camp or eliminate them entirely. It was fairly straightforward. Chen Ren felt a chill run down his spine at her words. The life of a cultivator was often harsh, but hearing it from someone who had lived through it made it all the more real. Yalan continued, and if anyone tries to kill you, well, guards are mortals anyway. Chen Ren shook his head slightly, then stopped doing it, noticing how he might look to the outsiders. I don't want to kill anyone, especially not over a noodle shop conflict. There are better ways to resolve this. Like what? The cat pressed, her curiosity piqued. He fell silent for a moment, considering his options. Then, after a pause filled with contemplation, he finally spoke. I might have a few plans, but first, we need to find out who we're standing against. Chapter 12. Tainting Reputation. Chen Ren's thoughts flowed like the river before a storm, the calm before inevitable trouble. Like any plan of his, starting a noodle business would never be smooth. It wasn't just the rice, the vegetables, or the mortar that demanded attention. Oh no, where there was meat, the wild animals came. Trouble, in any form, seemed drawn to him like moths to flame. After all, the path of a cultivator never allowed peace for long. And now, even this humble noodle stall had become a stage for confrontation. His hand tightened around the spoon as he remembered how the guard had approached him, all swagger and false bravado. The man's eyes spoke of arrogance, the kind born from ignorance. His words were aimed at attacking him and finding any reason to crumble the name Chen Ren had been creating around the marketplace. Whoever sent him had no idea of him, no idea of who they were trying to bully, no idea that Chen Ren was a cultivator. That was a minus point for whoever was behind, not doing enough research. But that was what made things interesting, wasn't it? Most wouldn't dare cross someone who could split stones with a finger, let alone simmer broth with a flicker of qi. The guard's ignorance had saved his skin, just barely. However, Chen Ren doubted they'd just give up and not try something more to accomplish whatever goal they had in mind. He sighed, stirring the broth with deliberate slowness as all these questions and confusions came to his mind one after another. Where there's meat, the beasts gather, he muttered under his breath. Being a cultivator had saved his stall this time, but Cloud Mist City nestled so close to a guardian sect and was home to more cultivators than he could count. He knew better than to rely on his status alone to protect him. A cultivator here was like a drop of water in the ocean, easy to blend in, easy to get swallowed by something bigger. Even so, a small grin tugged at his lips. Let them come, rivals or not. He had been in tougher battles than mere noodle stalls could ever provoke. If his enemies thought he'd be easy prey, they would soon discover just how deep the water truly ran. For the next 2 days, Chen Ren's mind moved like the shifting clouds, mapping out scenarios and contemplating every possible angle. He wasn't one for brute force, not when he could win with finesse. Violence, while always an option, wasn't his first choice. His gaze flicked to the cat beside him, her amber eyes glowing as she looked at the streaming flow of consumers. She was his hidden trump card, a power he didn't dare reveal to the world yet. Not while he was still weak and unable to protect himself against anyone of a higher realm. His cultivation, though progressing, was still in the early stages of body forging. Any opponent above that realm would crush him like dry leaves underfoot. Thus, Braun had to take a back seat. His brain, however, was sharper than any blade. So, he focused on his noodle stall for some time until he decided on what was best to be done next. Fortunately, everything ran without a hitch. He made more money each day, his hands growing more accustomed to the daily grind. The chi that once surged through his core was diminishing, just as the cat had warned him. But that didn't stop him from keeping a vigilant eye on the horizon, half expecting a debtor or some envious soul to appear, hungry for the wealth he was making. But no one came. Not yet. On the third morning, an unease settled over him like a shroud. It wasn't just paranoia. This was something real, something tangible. Old Man Tian's hunched figure appeared near the stall, his weathered face grave with news. "Young Master Chen Ren," the old man grumbled, his voice a low rasp. His eyes narrowed towards the broth as he looked back up at Chen Ren, who gave him his undivided attention. "I've heard it. For sure this time. They're going to make their move today. They're jealous your stall is minting money so fast." Though the facts were loud, his voice was comparatively low, cautious enough not to let anyone else hear. Chen Ren subtly nodded, stirring his broth with a forced calmness he didn't feel on the inside. "I see," he replied evenly, his mind already running through his contingency plans. "Well, I've prepared everything. It should be fine. You're sure they won't act before the afternoon?" Old Man Tian nodded, squinting toward the marketplace. "Yes, not before. They're waiting for the crowds to build up first." Chen Ren smiled. "Good. That gives me enough time to finish the morning rush." Old Man Tian nodded firmly. "I wish you all the best." Chen Ren exhaled slowly, his mind sharpening as he watched the old man. At first, he'd considered Old Man Tian as a possible culprit behind his troubles. They had a rivalry, after all. The old man had his stall nearby, and while their competition wasn't exactly cutthroat, it was enough to raise suspicions. But Old Man Tian was no fool. He'd been the one to help Chen Ren secure the elusive permit for his stall in the first place. If he had wanted him out of the way, he could have easily tipped off the guard about his status as a cultivator. Fortunately, Old Man Tian was wise enough not to take the fight against a cultivator. Shaking off the thought, Chen Ren returned to the moment just as the old man spoke again. "So, if all goes according to plan, you'll lend me the kids, right?" Chen Ren gave a slow nod. "Yes, for an hour. They'll help advertise your stall, but you've got to feed them twice in return. Daily. No shortcuts." He grinned, his yellowed teeth showing. Yes, I will. I'm fair." With a satisfied nod, the old man turned to shuffle back toward his own stall, hurrying through the crowd knowing the morning rush was about to begin. As soon as he was out of earshot, Xiaolan's soft voice cut through the morning air. "You sure it's okay to give away your marketing tricks like that?" Chen Ren smirked, his gaze still fixed on the swirling broth before him. "It'll spread no matter what. At least this way, the kids get more food. The only reason Old Man Tian's even asking through me is because his breath scared them all away." Chen Ren snickered at his own words while Xiaolan let out a small chuckle, her amusement clear as they moved toward the bustling stall, which started getting busier considering more people were coming. The line of customers waiting for noodles stretched longer with each passing minute as he and Tang Xiaolan got to work. The clatter of bowls and the murmur of conversation filled the air, as Chen Ren worked in rhythm with the growing demand, dishing out one bowl after another in almost mechanical movements as his muscles grew accustomed to the motion. Hours passed by and soon, the sun was halfway through setting. Afternoon was here, and with it, the crowd doubled, adding in the workers who were here to grab lunch. "Here you go." Chen Ren handed a bowl of vegetable noodles to an older woman. She grabbed it with both her hands and then balanced it in one hand to pay 7 copper won. Chen Ren retrieved the money with a small smile and focused on the next customer. Everything was moving, just as planned, but he knew this peace wouldn't last. Yalin, who had been lounging lazily in the sun, suddenly opened one of her flared amber eyes. "I see some movement up ahead," she told Chen Ren, her voice smooth as silk. Chen Ren's gaze swept across the bustling crowd before locking onto two men moving purposefully through the throng. Unlike the leisurely pace of the other customers browsing stalls and sampling goods, these two stood out immediately. He squinted his eyes to take a good look at both of them, to clearly know what he was going to be dealing with. The first man who stormed forward was a tall, skinny figure with broad shoulders. His dark hair fell in disarray around his forehead, and his brows were knitted together in a fierce scowl. His black eyes burned with indignation, radiating a palpable intensity that made those around him instinctively step back as he walked, pushing past them and clenching his fists. In a pronounced difference, the second man trailed behind him, frail and gaunt, as if he had not gotten a proper meal in days. His skin was a sickly shade of pale, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead, betraying his distress. Dark circles under his bloodshot eyes hinted at exhaustion, while his trembling hands grasped the edge of the tall man for support. Each unsteady step he took seemed to echo his nausea, and his thin lips were drawn tight, a silent plea for respite from the situation he found himself in. "Here it comes," Chen Ren muttered under his breath, bracing himself. The two men barged through the line, causing a stir among the waiting customers. The angry one, face flushed with indignation, wasted no time before raising his voice. "Everyone, stop eating those noodles," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Chen Ren's stall. "They'll make you sick. You might even get poisoned. This man is vile, feeding low-quality food to innocent people. Look at my brother. He ate here yesterday, and now he's been puking his guts out all day. The herbalist says he won't heal for a week." At his outburst, a murmur of uncertainty rippled through the crowd like someone blew a horn through the silence. Customers froze mid-bite, their chopsticks suspended in the air as they exchanged bewildered looks. Some stared down at their bowls, looking as if the once tempting noodles now appeared less appetizing under the scrutiny of accusation, while others cast wary glances toward Chen Ren, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. A few patrons instinctively backed away from the stall, their movements hesitant and cautious, as if they were retreating from a looming threat. Whispers flitted through the air, weaving a line of doubt among the onlookers. "Did you hear what he said?" one woman murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sick from the noodles? Is it true?" The atmosphere thickened with suspicion, as the aroma of the freshly cooked noodles, once enticing, was now tainted by the accusation. Chen Ren could feel the daggers of doubt piercing through the air and trying to stab him. He looked to his left, ignoring the whispers for a second. A child near the front of the line clutched his mother's hand tightly, his wide eyes darting between the angry man and the noodles, trying to comprehend the sudden shift in mood. "Now, how can I let you ruin a nice meal? And my reputation?" Chen Ren narrowed his eyes and stepped forward. "What nonsense are you spouting?" His words cut through the growing commotion, but the angry man wasn't finished. "Spouting lies, am I?" The man's face twisted into an exaggerated mask of righteous fury. He jabbed a finger toward his pale, nauseous companion. "Look at my brother. He's practically on his deathbed, and all because of your noodles." Chen Ren's gaze flicked to the sickly-looking guy, then back to the accuser. "You decided to bring your brother who's on his deathbed to sprout bullshit? Seems like you care about accusing me more than your brother. Tell me, what proof do you have that my noodles caused this?" His voice was steady, but his chi simmered in his dantian, ready to rise at a moment's notice. The man seized the opportunity, launching into a dramatic tale. "My brother here is an apprentice scribe. We're so poor we can only afford one meal a day, and yesterday, he spent it on your wretched noodles." He spat the words one after another in extreme slowness to emphasize his point. "Now he's so ill he can't even stand properly. You can't deflect responsibility this time. Return my money tenfold, and publicly apologize for poisoning him." A sharp anger flared in Chen Ren, but his expression remained straight. He let just a flicker of his chi surface, his eyes gleaming with a subtle, icy chill. It wasn't much, but enough to send a ripple of unease through the man in front of him. The accuser faltered, taking a nervous step back as if an unseen force had brushed against him. But before Chen Ren could press further, a voice rang out from the edge of the marketplace. "What's going on here?" A guard, tall with broad shoulders, made his way through the crowd. His face was rugged, framed by a jawline that could have been carved from stone, and his dark hair was cropped short, highlighting the sharp angles of his features. His eyes swept over the scene with an air of authority, hand resting casually on his hips. His armor bore the crest of the city watch, gleaming in the sunlight as he stepped closer, his presence instantly silencing the gathering commotion. Chen Ren's eyes flicked to the guard, and his thoughts shifted. This wasn't the same one from before. He guessed that the previous guard must have gotten spooked and backed out. This new one had a different air. He wasn't just here to intimidate. He was part of the plan, a second pawn set in motion. Chen Ren's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. Whatever scheme was unfolding, he was ready for it. The angry man immediately moved towards the guard, telling his fake story, face strained with rage. After hearing the man's story, the guard took a deep breath and turned toward Chen Ren, his expression serious. "Is it true? You fed this man's brother noodles, and now he's sick? You need to come with us to the guard station, so we can solve this problem once and for all." Guard station? So they planned to drag him through the city's bureaucracy to ruin him, and the guard was playing along. The air around Chen Ren seemed to still as his annoyance built. "There's no proof he even ate my noodles," Chen Ren said, his voice steady yet sharp. The guard crossed his arms, unimpressed. "It doesn't matter. Someone's accusing you of making them sick, and the law is the law. We'll solve this at the guardhouse. Now, come quietly." "No." Chen Ren's voice dropped an octave, and the edge of his patience showed. "You can't take me based on nothing but hearsay." The guard's eyes hardened as he ran a hard hand through his jaw. "I heard you are a cultivator, but you still have to follow the city's laws. And don't think you're above them. There are cultivators among the city guards as well. So, comply." Chen Ren frowned. The man didn't look like the type to bulge if he only used his words, but he wasn't going to let them ruin his reputation so easily. If he really went to the station, rumors would spread that his noodles actually made people sick, no matter if he came out innocent or not. He glanced at the crowd, dozens of eyes fixed on him, waiting for what he would do next. "Wait," Chen Ren said, voice rising just enough to capture everyone's attention. He turned to the sickly man and his accuser. "You're not just claiming my noodles made him sick. You're tarnishing the reputation of my stall. I can't let that stand." Before the guard could respond, Chen Ren strode to his stall, scooping up a bowl of freshly made noodles. He held it out toward the guard. "Here, try it." The guard eyed the bowl, suspicion thick in his gaze. "I won't eat bad noodles." Chen Ren shrugged, calm and composed. "Fine, I'll eat it myself." Without hesitation, he took a generous bite, chewing slowly as if savoring the flavor. Then, he turned, facing the crowd now gathered around the scene. "You see that?" Chen Ren's voice rang out over the murmurs. "If my noodles were bad, why would I eat them myself?" The tension in the air shifted as people began to exchange uncertain glances, and the unease that had crept into the crowd started to dissipate. Chen Ren met their gazes one by one, making sure they saw his calm and certainty. "My reputation, and my stall's reputation, are on the line. If my food was dangerous, I wouldn't serve it, and I definitely wouldn't eat it." The guard faltered for a moment, and the crowd's whispering grew louder as they started to reconsider the accusation. Chen Ren wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and stood tall. The crowd had begun to sway in Chen Ren's favor when a voice cut through the rising murmurs. "Just accept that your noodles made someone sick." A deep, grating voice came from across the street. All the eyes, including Chen Ren's own, turned towards where the voice came from. The speaker was an older man with a broad chest, a grizzled beard, and a sneer that never quite left his face. He looked like he could fight with two men at the same time and end up winning for how his physique was built. But again, looks could be deceiving. His name was Jiang Wu, a stall owner who sold steamed buns. Behind him stood his two burly sons, arms crossed, their expressions mirroring their father's contempt. "You're just trying to save face. But everyone here knows that when there's smoke, there's fire." Jiang Wu's words struck a chord with some of the onlookers, their uncertainty flickering back to life as they glanced between Chen Ren and the sickly man. The balance was delicate, too delicate. Chen Ren's fingers twitched at his side, the glint in his eyes sharpening as he regarded Jiang Wu with a cool gaze. Before Chen Ren could respond, the guard stepped forward again, voice firm. "Enough of this. You need to come with me, cultivator or not. We can settle this at the guardhouse." Chen Ren's stance remained unyielding, his voice calm but resolute. "I won't go with you. If you want to move me, you can try." The guard bristled, hand moving toward his baton as if testing Chen Ren's words. But just as tension threatened to break, a voice, clear and commanding, echoed over the crowd. "What's going on here?" All eyes turned toward the source of the voice. Walking toward the scene was Tang Yuqiu, the young miss of the Tang clan, with her maid trailing a step behind her. Her presence suddenly became obvious in the marketplace chaos, a figure of poise and authority amidst the rabble. Her eyes briefly scanned the situation, landing on Chen Ren with a raised brow. Chen Ren felt a smile tug at his lips. Finally, it was time to turn this around. This was the shift he needed, and it couldn't have come at a better time. He gave her a respectful nod as she reached the front, his mind already racing through the next steps of his plan. Chapter 13. Turning it over. In a matter of seconds, the attention that had been focused on Chen Ren shifted entirely to the woman who had just arrived. Her attire stood out against the modest crowd. An elegant red robe embroidered with delicate white roses at the hem, accompanied by a necklace and rings that spoke of wealth and status. She moved with a grace that naturally commanded attention, her presence turning heads as she approached and stood in front of Chen Ren's stall. Anyone with a discerning eye could instantly recognize her as someone of importance. However, the moment the heavy, curious eyes fell on her, she spoke, her voice coming out clear and firm, similar to how tall she stood. "What is going on?" The guard took a deep breath, trying to compose himself as he faced the young miss. "It's like this," he began, his voice faltering as he gestured toward the stall. "One of these two brothers, locals, came by yesterday and ate at his stall. Not long after, this one started complaining about stomach pains, claiming he was poisoned by the noodles he served. He is saying the food was spoiled and that it made him sick. This is his elder brother, telling how this one's at his deathbed and wants justice against the stall owner who fed his brother bad noodles." His words came quickly as if to rid himself of the burden of the accusation. But once he finished, Tang Yuqiu merely cast a sharp look at him and asked, her tone measured but piercing, "So, you believe he sold sickly noodles?" The guard hesitated, his confidence wavering under her steady gaze. It wasn't just Tang Yuqiu and Chen Ren, but even the consumers who surrounded the stall looked at the guard awaiting a reasonable response. "That's what I've heard," he said, his voice faltering. "We need to investigate, and for that, the man must come with us." Her frown deepened as her eyes swept over the gathered crowd, scanning their faces quietly. Her gaze looked sharper than a razor as she dragged it along the people. Even the air felt uncomfortable as a few seconds passed by. After a pause, she turned her attention back to the guard. "If you don't know," she began, her voice cutting through the tension. "Let me clarify. The noodles he sells are made from rice, a fact anyone here can see from their texture and appearance. The Tang clan has a direct arrangement with Chen Ren, and I, myself, oversee the transaction and can guarantee that the rice is of high quality without any blemishes on it. But she stepped closer, her gaze hardening as she stared the guard down. "I am Tang Yuqiu, daughter of the Tang clan head, Tang Jihao. If you truly mean to make this accusation, you are not merely questioning Chen Ren but questioning the reputation of the entire Tang household. Is that a risk you are willing to take? Tell me." The revelation of her identity caused more than a few people to look at her differently. Tang clan might not be a cultivator clan, but they had deep pockets to hire a lot of them. And everyone in the city knew the kind of reputation they uphold. The guard paled visibly, beads of sweat forming at his temple and around his shaved mustache. He licked his lips and visibly contemplated what she had said. And as the man hesitated, Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The two brothers, who had stirred up the commotion, looked ashen, especially the sickly one, who seemed on the verge of collapse. He was holding onto his dear brother, who now looked to want nothing more than to run, hide himself, and never look behind. Desperation flickered in the guard's eyes as he stammered, "No, young Miss Tang. We were only trying to do our job." Tang Yuqiu raised an eyebrow, her gaze cold. "Your job, is it? A job that involves creating a public spectacle and tarnishing the reputation of someone not only a cultivator but also a guest of the Tang clan? Huh. You have guts." Her voice carried a dangerous edge, and she leaned in slightly. "My father meets the city lord every year at the Winter Solstice Festival. Perhaps I should mention this little incident to him. Let him know about how the guards of this city treat honored guests of our clan." The guard paled further, his bravado crumbling. He took a step forward and raised one hand in the air. "No, young miss, it wasn't my intention to go against the Tang clan. But you're saying that there is something wrong with the noodles. You also sounded pretty adamant about taking Chen Ren to the guardhouse. I mean, that's what—" Before he could finish, the shopkeeper, Jiang Wu, who had been accusing Chen Ren, interrupted, desperation in his voice. "Wait, it might not be the rice, but what about the vegetables? They could have been bad. I have seen him handing out those vegetable noodles." That statement turned all the attention from the cornered guard towards Jiang Wu. Tang Yuqiu's eyes narrowed, and she turned her attention to Chen Ren, her voice calm as she pointed at the baskets of fresh vegetables sitting on top of his stall. "The vegetables, aren't they from the Tang clan manor as well? Isn't that right, Chen Ren?" Chen Ren quickly nodded, grateful for her support. "Yes, they are, Yuqiu." His eyes briefly met hers, and he flashed a look of silent gratitude. She narrowed her eyes slightly at him for calling her by her first name, but quickly understood his intention as he added, "The man is just unaware of my close relationship with the Tang clan and how I have no reason to scour bad ingredients when I could get the best ones in the city easily." The guard, seeing the tide turning against him, immediately bowed at Tang Yuqiu. "I'm sorry for what just happened here, young Mississippi. It seems like this is all a big misunderstanding. Please allow me to correct my mistakes." "Go on. I would like to see that." Tang Yuqiu crossed her arms as every eye moved to the guard. "You." The guard turned towards the aggressive brother. "It seems the noodles didn't make your brother sick after all. Now, get out of here unless you want me to arrest you for defamation of an honored cultivator." His voice trembled as he addressed the two brothers. The sick brother clung desperately to the taller one, his breath ragged, skin pale and slick with sweat. His hands trembled as he gripped his sibling's arm, eyes wide with fear. The taller one, his face drained of all color, cast frantic glances around the marketplace, his composure unraveling. For a moment, the crowd stood frozen, watching as panic took hold of the two. Their movements became jittery and uncontrolled as the sick brother let out a strained gasp. Without exchanging a word, they both turned, stumbling over their own feet, and bolted. The sick one clenched tighter to the taller and dragged along as they fled, leaving nothing but murmurs and curious eyes after him. The guard, desperate to escape his own shame, bowed again, this time toward both Tang Yuqiu and Chen Ren, muttering a hasty apology before attempting to slip away. But Chen Ren stepped forward, his hand rising to stop him. "Wait," he said, his voice calm but firm, freezing the guard in place. Chen Ren's eyes gleamed with subtle amusement as he addressed the guard. "Since you're already here, why not check the ingredients at the other stalls as well? I'm sure you might find someone worthy of your attention. After all, it wouldn't be right to leave empty-handed, would it?" His tone was light, but the underlying message was clear. The guard, catching on to the meaning behind his words, quickly nodded. Yes, you're right. I was only here to ensure the stall owners were following the rules anyway." His tone was hurried, eager to deflect from the earlier confrontation. He looked around as if he didn't know where to begin, his eyes shifting from one stall to another, even looking at the old man Tian's stall, which was right across the road. "Well," Chen Ren casually gestured toward Jiang Wu and the steamed bun stall behind him. "Why not start with that stall over there?" The guard's eyes widened slightly, realizing what Chen Ren was hinting at. Of course, he replied, as Jiang Wu and his two sons shook from the response. Their eyes and mouth widened at what was about to come. With a final, shallow bow, the guard moved toward the accused stall, leaving the crowd whispering and pointing fingers at the steamed buns. The crowd thinned after the commotion ended, yet the stall remained lively. Steam curled upward from the large pot, carrying the scent of savory broth and freshly cooked noodles. Chen Ren stood beside the stall, watching as Tang Yuqiu elegantly lifted a bowl of vegetable noodles to her lips, her expression unreadable as she took a delicate bite. Her maid stood nearby, eating in silence, the soft clink of their chopsticks the only sound between them. Shulan effortlessly managed the stall, handing bowls to waiting customers with the same precision one might expect from a master swordsman, her movements swift yet graceful and well-practiced. Meanwhile, the Yalan slept lazily on a shaded ledge nearby, undisturbed by the flurry of activity. The scene felt peaceful in a way Chen Ren hadn't expected after the earlier confrontation. Just as he glanced over at Tang Yuqiu, she tilted her head, her gaze fixed on a distant scene. Following her line of sight, Chen Ren saw Jiang Wu being dragged away by the same guard who moments before tried to arrest him. The shopkeeper's sons stumbled behind, crying loudly as the crowd murmured, staring at the spectacle of the family being hauled off for selling expired ingredients. It was a sight to behold, justice served in the most public ways. You know, Tang Yuqiu spoke softly between bites, her eyes never leaving the scene. They'll likely be back on the street within a week. Stall owners often have good connections with the guards or others in the market. They're the first to be disturbed if anything happens after all. Chen Ren smirked slightly, nodding as he wiped his hands on a cloth. I know. Jiang Wu has ties with the captain of the guard who patrols this area. It's how he managed to pull off this entire setup against me in the first place. He glanced over his shoulder at the crowd, still gossiping about the incident. He'll definitely return, but his reputation? That's over. Tang Yuqiu raised a brow, curious. And you're fine with that? He dared to go frame a cultivator. I thought you'd go straight to killing, or at least beat them up. Chen Ren nodded. I could have tried to flip the entire incident back on him earlier, but it would have been his word against mine. Even with proof, he could have dismissed it as baseless accusations. But now? He motioned toward him, who was still being dragged through the market. Now, everyone will know he's the one who sold faulty food. It's not just a rumor anymore. It's fact. Also, I don't want to break any laws of the city. Even if cultivators are hot-headed, any confrontation within the city would get you a trip down the pits, cultivator or not. And it's beneath me to challenge them to a public duel. Tang Yuqiu paused, her lips curling into a faint smile as she took another bite. Chen Ren leaned against the stall, his eyes scanning the bustling market. Moreover, he said, a hint of calculation in his voice, I used this whole situation to make my connection to you and the Tang clan known. Now, none of these people will dare bother me. I don't want to deal with nonsense like this again. You've got more brains than I expected. I haven't put them to proper use in a long time, but when I do, they work just fine. Her eyes narrowed in curiosity. Planning to use them more often from now on? Yeah, that's the plan, he said, turning to her with an appreciative nod. And thank you for helping me out this time. I couldn't have pulled this off without you. Yuqiu's chopsticks froze mid-air as she blinked, taken aback by his sincerity. Her lips parted, but she quickly regained her composure, giving him a short nod. So, should I consider it a favor? Chen Ren rubbed the back of his neck, his expression thoughtful. Sure, just don't ask for anything outrageous. I'm already in debt as it is. Yuqiu laughed softly, a sound more genuine than before. I'm not planning to, but her tone shifted, a mischievous glint in her eyes. It might not be as easy as you think. Chen Ren could only smile wryly, knowing full well that with someone like Tang Yuqiu, favors were rarely ever simple. Chapter 14. Right kind of opportunity. Chen Ren leaned against the wooden frame of his stall, arms crossed, eyes watching the flow of people on Market Street. It had been a week since Jiang Wu's little stunt had been decimated by him, trying to sabotage him with rumors about his noodles. And now, like clockwork, Every vendor kept their distance from him, and no one dared to go against him. As expected, Jiang Wu's steamed bun stall had seen fewer and fewer customers each day. In a business where word of mouth ruled like a tyrant, faulty ingredients were a death sentence. The foolish man had cursed his own livelihood. Meanwhile, Chen Ren's fortunes were a rising tide. More customers came daily, their numbers swelling as though drawn by an invisible current. A bowl of noodles had become a staple of the market crowd, bringing him more business than he could have anticipated. 120 to 130 bowls a day, he murmured, running the numbers in his head. At 5 to 7 copper one per bowl, that meant he could earn between 600 and 910 copper one daily. Over the course of a month, the numbers compounded further. After deducting costs for ingredients, wood for the fire, and other essentials, he was left with a profit margin that hovered around 150 silver when every month. It was more money than he had ever held in his hands in this world, and even after paying Tang Xiulan for her help, there was still a respectable sum left for himself. Yet when he considered the mountain of debt he owed, the price for his medallion, this new fortune was more like a drop in the ocean. He would be able to reclaim the medallion, yes, but it would be tight. Perhaps, just barely, by the end of the set time. He also had to remember the fact that Feng Ming wasn't his only debtor. But Chen Ren didn't worry too much. Why should he? His first business venture was thriving, and along the way, he had unknowingly connected to the Dao of Money. It was esoteric in nature, something most cultivators overlooked in their pursuit of power, but Chen Ren had felt its pull, its hidden current. Money flowed like qi, always moving, always circulating, with its own momentum. And momentum, Chen Ren knew, was everything. With the ideas swirling in his mind like a vortex, he felt certain he would conquer his debts sooner than expected. His thoughts were already moving beyond the simple act of selling noodles. But for now, he pushed those ambitions aside. There were other things to focus on. His first goal, stabilizing the stall, had been met. It was time to shift his focus inward. He should begin to devote more time to learning about cultivation techniques, something he had neglected in his pursuit of profit. A balance needed to be struck. After all, the Tao was not just about silver and copper. In the quiet, secluded garden of the Tang clan, Chen Ren stood before a wooden training dummy. The air was still, disturbed only by the soft rustling of leaves, and the warmth of the afternoon sun kissed his skin. His hands flexed in front of him, muscles tensing as he focused on his next move. "Thundering fist!" he yelled, thrusting his fists forward with force. A spark of lightning arced out from his knuckles, crackling faintly in the air before dissipating. His punch connected with the dummy, causing a few minor cracks to spread across its surface. Chen Ren stepped back, his brows furrowing in frustration. He glanced over at Yalan lounging nearby, her amber eyes half closed as she basked lazily in the sun. "You sure this isn't a faulty technique?" he asked, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. Yalan didn't bother to open her eyes fully, stretching out lazily. "It's not faulty," she purred. The rest of the words came aloud. "It's one of the few fist techniques passed down in the Chen clan. Works well with your element. Thunder resonates with your qi. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to pick up a sword." Chen Ren followed Yalan's gaze, glancing over at the neatly arranged swords and cultivation manuals lying on the side. The Chen clan had always been a clan of swordsmen, known for their mastery of blade techniques. It was clear why the old Chen Ren had wanted to join the Soaring Sword sect. Everything in his upbringing had pointed to it. But for the former, the thought of wielding a sword left him cold. He wasn't interested in close combat weapons. Swords, spears, hatchets, axes, they were cool to play with in games, but in real life, he would rather keep his distance from the enemy. Hence, the idea of wielding a bow had intrigued him ever since he first entered this world. To defend from a distance, to strike from afar, that was more his style. But cultivators who specialized in bows were rare. Bows required such fine precision and balance between strength and qi that it was hard to even find one that could withstand the power of a cultivator. For now, he was stuck with the basics, working on his form and balance with these fist techniques. Even though it was a close combat technique, it would be smart to learn a technique or two like this. He had to start somewhere, and at least the thundering fist seemed to align with his element, even if he couldn't fully control it yet. He had also read in the manual that it could be used to throw around arcs of lightning, even from a distance at a greater mastery, so there was more than enough reason to learn it. Taking a deep breath, Chen Ren squared up with the dummy once more, his fists raised. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to sense the flow of qi in the air. This time, as he struck forward again, he could feel it, the energy around him becoming more tangible. The qi was beginning to respond to his movements, his strikes gaining a subtle weight behind them. "Thundering fist," he called out again, his fist cutting through the air. This time, the sparks of lightning were stronger, lingering a bit longer before vanishing. As he pulled his hand back, he glanced down at his arms. Lightning crackled faintly along his skin, running up his forearms. His control over his qi was growing, and with it, the technique's potential. A slow grin crept across his face. "Better," he muttered, feeling the thrum of power starting to build within him. Chen Ren flexed his fingers, watching the faint arcs of lightning still dancing along his forearms. The power was starting to feel more natural, almost as if it belonged there. But a thought gnawed at the back of his mind. He glanced at Yalan, now lazily stretching, completely unbothered by his struggles. "Hey," he called out, "you sure this is just a mortal-grade technique?" Yalan's tail twitched, and she opened one eye to peer at him. "Yes, it's a mortal-grade technique," she replied with a yawn. "If it were Earth-grade, you'd barely be able to perform it. Most Earth-grade techniques require a lot more qi. Even though you're starting to sense it, using qi in techniques is an entirely different art." Chen Ren frowned, running a hand over his arm, where the lightning had cracked moments before. "And why doesn't the lightning harm me?" Yalan sat up, blinking as if the answer should have been obvious. "You've got lightning affinity spirit roots," she said. "Your affinity gives you a natural resistance. The technique won't harm you unless you push yourself too far." Chen Ren nodded, absorbing the information. It still felt strange to him, being able to wield lightning without burning himself, but he supposed there was logic to it, at least xianxia logic. If his spirit roots were tied to the element, it made sense that his body would be more in tune with it. He stepped back to the wooden dummy, his focus sharpening. His strikes came faster now, each punch laced with more qi from the last. "Thundering fist," he roared, his fist crashing into the dummy. Cracks began to spiderweb across its surface as arcs of lightning danced around the impact site. His control was improving. He could feel the qi more distinctly, his strikes more powerful, the lightning sharper. As he worked through another series of punches, Yalan's voice broke through his concentration. "What are you going to do about your Dao?" Chen Ren paused mid-strike, turning to face Yalan with a puzzled expression. "What do you mean?" Yalan tilted its head, giving him a scrutinizing look that ended up being cute due to her being a cat. "Your growth has slowed. You've been earning a decent amount from the stall, sure, but if you want to grow more, you'll need to improve it, or expand into other businesses. You can't just stay at one level forever." Chen Ren wiped his brow, his thoughts briefly drifting back to the noodle stall. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her robes a bit wrinkled unlike every other time he'd seen her in a perfect light, and her eyes carried a look of fierce determination, until they landed on him. She froze. Chen Ren, caught off guard, managed an awkward hello. For a moment, they stood there, an uncomfortable silence filling the space between them. Then, without a word, Tang Yuqiu brushed past him, her steps quick as she strode off down the hallway, her figure stiff with tension. Chen Ren exhaled softly and stared at the empty space where she'd been standing. He wasn't sure what he had walked into, but the weight of their conversation lingered in the air. "Come in," urged the voice of the clan head, cutting through his thoughts. Chen Ren straightened himself, stepping into the room. As he entered, Tang Jihao's eyes settled on him, offering a brief but warm smile. "Sorry you had to witness that," he said, gesturing for Chen Ren to approach. He looked down at Tang Jihao, sunken eyes, wrinkled face, frail figure, bony hands. Despite being known to be a foodie and a rich merchant, he looked worse than most poor commoners. Despite that, his voice was clear and serious, befitting of his status. Chen Ren guessed that the rumors about the man going through some sort of a curse were true, and as he took more than a comfortable amount of time to stare at him, Tang Jihao raked a hand through his goatee. That was enough of an action for him to shake his head and offer a polite bow. No problem at all. His gaze shifted to Tang Jihao's expression, calm yet burdened, and he stepped forward, holding up the bowl of noodles. I thought an Eastern delicacy might lighten the stress of running so many successful businesses. Tang Jihao's pupils dilated slightly with interest as the steam from the bowl wafted toward him. Ah, your famed noodles. A thoughtful gesture. Chen Ren presented the dish, hoping the food would offer more comfort than his words. He could still feel the tension from the previous exchange hanging in the room, but for now, he must focus on the present. Tang Jihao took the bowl with a small smile, steam rising as he inspected the dish. Very interesting, he said in a warm tone. The noodles were a simple gesture, but for someone like Tang Jihao, they were the best way to approach. It also seemed to work as the man raised his hand and gestured to Chen Ren to take the opposite seat. Chen Ren complied, watching as the clan head took his first bite. His gaze was unreadable, but after a brief pause, the head let out a quiet sound of approval. The tension in the room seemed to ease with every slurp of broth, and Chen Ren felt his shoulders relax slightly. Thank you for letting me stay here for so long, Chen Ren began, his voice steady but sincere. Even if I've been nothing but trouble. Tang Jihao's head chuckled softly, setting the bowl down for a moment. Well, these noodles are good enough to make me let you stay for a whole year. Chen Ren, his tone lightening, replied, then I'll make sure to have it delivered every day. Tang Jihao laughed, a deep, genuine sound. Chen Ren, you've really changed. You're very different from the first time we met. Chen Ren didn't flinch at the statement, keeping his expression composed. I know. The head's eyes narrowed slightly in curiosity. Why is that? I've been meaning to ask ever since you started your business. Chen Ren paused for a moment, thinking of how to pick his words carefully. After a breath, he replied, I realized the path I was fighting for wasn't mine. I was inadequate and arrogant. The heavens are open to all, but only those with the ability can afford to be arrogant. I didn't have any, so I changed my path. The old man's gaze lingered on him, thoughtful. And what is your path now? Chen Ren considered the question, feeling the weight of it. He could hardly tell the truth, that his true path was still blurry, somewhere between survival, finding his footing in a world that wasn't his own and creating a business empire. But instead, he smiled faintly and decided to mix them with lies. My path is one of business. I want to help people, make their lives comfortable by selling things, and earn karma in return. A path of a merchant? A path of prosperity, Chen Ren corrected. Tang Jihao nodded, seemingly impressed. A noble goal. And how did you come to this conclusion? Chen Ren, maintaining his calm, crafted his next story with care. My ancestor who founded the Chen clan. Before he became a cultivator, he was a merchant. He walked the path of prosperity until a chance encounter with the heavens led him to cultivation. But even after that, he never forgot his roots in trade. Through his business, he prospered many lives. I thought he was always a cultivator. No, he was a merchant first. His success in business laid the foundation for the cultivation path he later took. It was his understanding of balance, both in trade and cultivation, that led him to prosper. Tang Jihao let out another small chuckle, nodding thoughtfully. Interesting. You've given me a lot to think about. A path of prosperity, you say? Chen Ren nodded, his expression unwavering, though inside, he knew the truth was far more complicated. It was, in fact, true that one of Chen Ren's ancestors had been a merchant who stumbled upon a chance encounter that changed the course of his life. However, despite that origin, the Chen clan wasn't built on trade but rather on blood and blades. Even now, they were known as a sword clan, ruthless and battle-hardened, with little room for the softer arts of commerce. Still, the story served its purpose. The clan head took another bite of the noodles, his approval clear. I'm proud of you for walking down the path of your ancestor, he added. Chen Ren offered a humble nod, his posture relaxed, but his mind was still calculating. The head leaned back and pulled out a small bundle of letters, setting them on the table between them with a heavy thud. You know what these are, the head said, his tone losing some of its warmth. Chen Ren's eyes flicked to the letters. He knew exactly what they were. Yes, they're letters from my debtors. Tang Jihao's expression darkened slightly as he added, they asked me about your debts, thinking I would pay them off for you. Chen Ren had anticipated this. He had been aware of the clan head's role in keeping the debt collectors at bay for a while now. He had written letters, asking for more time, but that wouldn't have done much if his debtors hadn't assumed that he was under the Tang clan. I appreciate that truly, Chen Ren said, his tone careful. I know they've been pressing you. Tang Jihao gave a slow nod. Yes, I've been keeping them from taking any action against you because I find you interesting. But it won't stay this way forever, Chen Ren. Chen Ren had expected as much. He knew Tang Jihao wasn't doing this out of charity or goodwill. I understand. It must be difficult to hold them off on my behalf, and I'm grateful for it. But I think I can give you a reason to hold them back a bit longer. The clan head's eyebrow arched slightly. And what reason would that be? Chen Ren's lips curled into a slow, calculated smile as he uttered a single name. Tang Yuqiu, your daughter. At the sound of the name, Tang Jihao's expression shifted ever so slightly. His eyes flickered with something. Surprise? Curiosity? Chen Ren couldn't tell. He waited, wondering what his response would be. After a moment, Tang Jihao leaned forward, his voice low. So, you're finally ready to marry her, then? Chen Ren froze, and his entire body went cold. His smile faded, replaced by a look of sheer panic. Chapter 15. A New Wind. Although Chen Ren had long known the Tang clan head's intentions when he allowed his body's former occupant to stay in the family's courtyard, he had hoped the man had abandoned those thoughts. But as he sat in front of Tang Jihao, hearing his sudden excitement and hopeful tone, Chen Ren knew his recent success had reignited those expectations. The clan head leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of paternal pride and ambition. It seems your growth has given me something to think about, young Ren. Perhaps there's a future between you and Yuqiu after all. Chen Ren felt a chill run down his spine. He had to clarify quickly before things spiraled further. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. My words were not about marriage. Tang Jihao's eyes narrowed, his expression shifting from hopeful to curious, almost predatory. Oh? And why not? His tone was sharper now, as if testing Chen Ren's response. Do you already have someone else in your heart? Although Yuqiu can be hot-headed, she's a beauty. You won't find another woman like her, certainly not in Cloud Mist City. I think you can be apprehensive since she won't allow more wives. But isn't she enough? You have seen her. She can certainly handle you. Chen Ren swallowed hard. His mind raced, trying to find the right words to avoid offense. It's not that, he said, his voice steady. But I've no intention of considering romance, not until I've cleared my debts. He glanced at the clan head, measuring his response before continuing. My focus right now is elsewhere, more on business than personal matters. Tang Jihao leaned back, stroking the goatee thoughtfully. His sharp gaze softened slightly, his interest peaked. Business, you say? His voice lost some of its edge, settling into something more curious. What exactly do you mean? Chen Ren took a deep breath, the tension in the room still palpable but shifting. Earlier, he began. I overheard your conversation. I know your daughter has been trying to start a business of her own. Tang Jihao's brows furrowed, his lips tightening. He nodded slowly. That's right. I gave her an investment and told her to test her capabilities. It didn't work out as she'd hoped. Business is not as simple as many believe. It's not all about capital but understanding people, markets, and timing. He sighed. I admit, I'm surprised you managed to run that noodle stall so effectively. It's no small feat. Chen Ren nodded in agreement. Exactly, it's difficult. That's why I'm offering to help her. But in exchange, I need two things. The clan head's eyes sharpened once more, the air between them growing still. Oh! He sat up straighter. His presence suddenly felt towering, demanding. And what exactly are these two things you're asking for? Chen Ren smiled and nodded, but just as he was about to step out, Tang Jihao added with a knowing smirk, and think about my daughter, would you? She may be mortal, but she's not a bad match. Especially if you're serious about becoming a merchant. For that, Chun gave a polite smile, though his mind was already elsewhere. Understood, he replied, nodding once before stepping out into the corridor. The corridor was quiet as he walked, his thoughts still circling the conversation with Tang Jihao. The weight of the proposal, Tang Yuchio's business, the creditors, the thinly veiled suggestion about marriage, hung heavy on his mind. But deeper still was the gnawing sense that his own plans were slowly slipping beyond his control. As if sensing his turmoil, a soft purr echoed from the shadows. Chen Ren turned to see a sleek, pure white-furred cat emerge from the corner, her amber eyes gleaming with amusement. "That girl isn't suitable for the Qin clan," Yalan remarked casually, her voice laced with nonchalance as she padded beside him. "I have nothing against mortals, of course, but as a cultivator, one should always seek an immortal as a spouse. Concubines, well, that's a different matter." Chen Ren sighed, shaking his head. "I don't have any plans for that right now." He glanced down at Yalan and glared at her. "Were you listening to the conversation?" Yalan lifted her chin, her tone imperious. "I was outside the door. It's easier to sneak around in this majestic body. No one suspects a thing." Chen Ren couldn't help but stifle a laugh. "Majestic?" "Compared to humans," Yalan replied smoothly, her tail flicking with pride. "I'm far quicker, with better reflexes. And no one ever suspects a lovely creature like myself. It's far more majestic than your body ever could be. If you try to do something like sneaking around a rich, merchant clan, you would be killed. But not me." Chen Ren bit his lip, trying to suppress his amusement, but Yalan's confidence was contagious. He let the moment pass, though, and focused on the more pressing matters at hand. "So, are you going to start this business with the Tang girl?" Yalan asked. "Why? I thought you had enough money to get your own stall up and running. Why can't you just spend it on expanding to other stuff?" "It's not enough," Chen Ren admitted, his mental voice lowering as they walked. "I need a face for distribution, someone with influence. I can't do it on my own. Xiaolan is too tied up with the other stalls, and the creditors. They're getting impatient. I have no other way to stop them." Yalan's eyes narrowed thoughtfully before she spoke again. "You could let me handle the creditors." Chen Ren stopped in his tracks, turning to look at her and not even bothering to speak in his mind. "You do that for me?" Yalan stretched lazily, her eyes half closed as she replied, "You're technically someone I'm supposed to protect, aren't you? I'll step in if your life gets close to danger. And besides," her eyes gleamed with a faint curiosity, "I'm also interested in your Dao. Whenever an esoteric Dao appears, big things tend to follow." Chen Ren stared at her for a long moment, a mix of amusement and curiosity flickering across his face. "You're that interested in my Dao?" Yalan didn't respond right away, simply turning her head to the side as if she hadn't heard the question. Then, with a slow, deliberate flick of her tail, she said, "Let's just say, I don't think you're as ordinary as you think you are." Chen Ren smiled to himself, his thoughts once again returning to the many complications that awaited him. But with Yalan beside him, whispering secrets of Dao and destiny, he felt a little more at ease. Even if he hadn't fully trusted her yet, it was better to have her on his side than against him. He let out a laugh through his nose and looked down. "I don't know about all that. Either way, I'd rather keep you as my trump card. If things get too bad, I'll call on you. But for now, I was planning to ask Yuchio for help. I still owe her a favor, so I can knock out two problems at once. And having the support of the Tang clan head won't hurt either." Yalan gave a satisfied nod as they continued walking, her ember eyes reflecting the lantern's dim glow in the corridors. It was quiet, the stillness only broken by the soft sound of their footsteps and the distant rustling of night wind through the courtyard trees. After a while, Chen Ren broke the silence. "By the way," he began slowly, "I've been wondering, do you know what's going on with the Tang Jihao? He looks sickly. He's the same in the previous Chen Ren's memories. And it doesn't seem like normal sickness." Yalan's ears flicked, her gaze shifting slightly. "I've noticed it too. It's not just physical. If I had to guess, I'd say it's a soul disease." "Soul disease?" Yalan's tail swished, her tone matter of fact. "A disease of the soul, yes. It's not natural either. Someone did this to him, most likely a cultivator. His soul is being eaten away bit by bit every day. That's why he looks so frail. I'd bet he's relying on pills and elixirs just to keep himself upright. Without them, he'd probably be coughing blood every other second. Chen Ren absorbed the information in silence, his mind racing. Soul diseases were far outside his realm of expertise. He had heard stories about them, tales of how the soul could be corrupted, rotted from the inside out, but never had he imagined that someone like Tang Jihao would be suffering from such a thing. For a moment, he considered offering help, but then quickly dismissed the thought. What could he do? He had no knowledge of treating soul diseases, nor the resources to even begin trying. And getting involved with something like that, it would be far too dangerous. I guess that explains a lot, Chen Ren finally said, his voice more subdued. Still, it's not my place to intervene. I wouldn't even know where to start. Helping Tang Yuqiu is enough. I'll leave that mess to those more qualified. Yalin gave him a sidelong glance, her whiskers twitching. Wise decision. Meddling with soul diseases is like trying to wrestle a demon. Either you win or you get consumed. Best to focus on your own path for now. Chen Ren nodded, but his mind couldn't help but linger on the thought. Tang Jihao, suffering in silence, put on a strong face while his very soul decayed. It was a grim reminder of the world he had stepped into. Strength wasn't just about physical power or martial prowess. Sometimes, the greatest battles were invisible to the naked eye. Still, he had other priorities, and getting too involved in the clan's affairs could only complicate things. He had his own plans, his own survival to worry about. With a final glance at Yalin, who now padded silently beside him, Chen Ren exhaled and pushed the thought from his mind. Under the vast expanse of the sky, Cloud Mist City sprawled out like a hazy dream, nestled among the rolling clouds that drifted lazily through the air. A man stood on top of the biggest mountain in the area, and from his position, he could instantly see how the city's walls rose into the distance. The atmosphere was cool and thick, almost tangible as if the city itself were cradled by fog. His blue robe fluttered gently in the wind, worn and frayed at the edges. Dirt and bloodstains marked its once flawless surface. His hair, as blue as the robes he wore, hung loosely down his back, swaying slightly with each gust of wind. The subtle gleam of the bracelet around his wrist caught the moonlight. He gazed down at the city, his sharp eyes taking in every detail as his heart tugged in anticipation. Finally, after a long moment of silence, he exhaled slowly. So, this is Cloud Mist City. His voice was low, roughened by fatigue and resolve. I'm finally here. He lifted his hand, brushing some dirt off his sleeve. Are you sure we'll find what we're looking for here? The wind swirled suddenly, carrying with it a presence. Faint at first, like a whisper on the edge of perception, but soon taking form. The air next to him rippled, and from the thin veil between the realms, a figure emerged. A ghostly silhouette, its shape resembling that of a demon, with twisted horns and sharp, red eyes. Its entire body flickered like a dying flame, both translucent and yet imposing. The ghost's voice was a rasping echo, barely louder than the wind. Yes, it said with certainty, its glowing eyes narrowing. But it won't be easy to acquire. The object's aura is faint, buried deep. It needs to be very close for me to sense its full nature. The man glanced sideways at the specter, his lips curving into a grim smile. That's no problem, he said, his voice cold and unwavering. I'll deal with whatever stands in my way. And if anyone tries to stop me, his eyes narrowed even at the thought of someone trying to stop him. I'll give them a show. A little blood tends to make an impression. The ghost chuckled, a dark, hollow sound that echoed in the wind. You speak like a true disciple of mine. Blood may not solve everything, but it certainly smooths the path. The specter's form shifted slightly, growing more defined as it loomed closer. I chose you for a reason. You're ruthless enough to survive this world and ambitious enough to carve your own path through it. The man clenched his fist, the bracelet around his wrist glowing faintly in response to his will. Then let's not waste any more time. We know what we need to do. As the ghost faded back into the shadows, the man stood there a moment longer, his gaze locked on Cloud Mist City below. The mists churned, obscuring the streets and rooftops as if the city itself were hiding secrets deep within its embrace. His heartbeat quickened, not from fear but anticipation. Whatever awaited him in that city, treasures, enemies, or bloodshed, he would face it head-on. The wind picked up, carrying his words into the distance. Whatever happens, this city won't forget my name. Chapter 16. Haggling. Bonus chapter. Although his plan had been perfectly laid out and set in his mind, even after speaking with Tang Jihao, one glaring problem clung to his side. Tang Yuqiu had vanished. Chen Ren had scoured the Tang manor and questioned every servant he could find, but all anyone knew was that she had left the manor. Being outside was about as useful as saying she was somewhere under the sky. The city was vast, and people disappeared easily into its winding streets, crowded districts, and hidden alcoves. He knew how people like Tang Yuqiu would act when they were troubled. Often, they'd seek quiet corners where the noise of life would fade away, and the chaos in their mind could find some peace. The issue was that those places were rarely obvious, especially for someone like Tang Yuqiu who would be smart enough not to hide in plain sight. Maybe she had somewhere private where she found comfort. Maybe it was a person. But again, he doubted she had such close friends considering her nature. He also hadn't seen her with anyone else other than her maid. But how would he know where to find her? How would anyone know? With a sigh, Chen Ren set off, his steps light but his mind heavy. The city stretched before him like a puzzle, its roads teeming with life. He made his way through familiar streets, heading towards the upper district, a more refined area beyond the bustling market. He had been here before, more than once, a wide landscape that offered a semblance of peace. Yet, even after combing the alleys and looking into the refined tea houses that someone like Tang Yuqiu would frequent, she was still nowhere to be found. His search felt endless, each corner revealing nothing but the familiar sights of merchants, shoppers, and city dwellers going about their day. The upper district may have offered more serenity, but it did not yield the answers he sought. Frustration clawed at him, his thoughts a jumble of worry and mild irritation. He had hoped to find her deep in thought somewhere, brooding in a corner, contemplating whatever troubles had sent her off in the first place. But it wasn't until he moved closer to the noodle stall, his last resort, that he spotted her. Tang Yuqiu, seated casually, bowls of noodles scattered around her like trophies from some odd competition. She wasn't brooding, wasn't lost in thought. Instead, she was slurping noodles with the kind of focus that suggested she was thinking about absolutely nothing at all. A soft, bemused voice broke the silence of his thoughts. "You should have looked for her here right away," Yalan, his feline companion, muttered from his side, her amber eyes glinting with amusement. Chen Ren sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I thought she'd be sitting somewhere, lost in thought, not slurping noodles. Some people eat when they're stressed," the cat remarked with an air of superiority, tail flicking lazily. "You humans have the strangest habits." Chen Ren shook his head, though a small smile tugged at his lips. Of all places. Still, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. She was here, not lost or troubled in some hidden corner. Just here, surrounded by noodles and clearly coping in her own way. Now, it was just a matter of talking to her about what was in his mind. Chen Ren gave a subtle nod to Yalan, acknowledging the cat's dry wisdom, before setting his sights on Tang Yuqiu. In the middle of a small mess of empty bowls, her eyes were narrowed but drew a blank. She was slurping the last of her noodles as if they held the answers to all her problems. It was still early, just before lunch, so the line for the stall was small but growing, the quiet before the midday rush. He stepped closer, weaving through the sparse crowd with ease, and gave a polite nod to Yuqiu, who glanced up at him with the barest flicker of acknowledgement. Her brows knit together in annoyance, but she didn't make any move to stop him. "I hope the noodles are satisfying your appetite," he said, a soft humor lacing his words. Her eyes flicked up, cool and sharp. "I don't want to talk to eavesdroppers," she replied, her voice low and edged with irritation. Chen Ren sighed but met her gaze evenly. "I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Your father called me there. I just happened to have a knack for being in the wrong place at the wrong time." She studied him for a moment, her expression softening just a fraction. The scowl that was on her lips turned to a thin, straight line. "I can see that," she muttered, though the edge hadn't entirely left her voice. "So, why are you bothering me now?" She swirled the noodles with her chopsticks and was playing with them as she waited for his response. Chen Ren moved closer, his tone shifting as he spoke with more purpose. "I have a way to alleviate your worries." He paused, letting his words settle. "As I'm living in your house, it's only right that I lend a hand." She looked at him, skepticism written plainly on her face. She placed the chopsticks on the bowl, balancing them carefully before setting the bowl aside. "How exactly can you help me?" She glared at him with a deadpan look on her face. Before he could respond, she laughed humorlessly, a dry laugh through her nose. "Don't joke, Chen Ren." As soon as she said it, she picked up the bowl again and started slurping noodles. "I'm not joking." His voice held a quiet confidence. He gestured to the stall behind him, to the small but growing crowd of customers waiting for their turn. "The place where you're eating noodles right now, I created it in mere weeks. No funding, just meager savings. And now look at it." Her eyes narrowed once again. "Are you trying to brag?" He shook his head. "No, I'm offering a proposal." Tang Yuchio's eyes searched his face, trying to determine if he was serious or just playing some elaborate joke. There was no deceit in his gaze, only a calm certainty. "A proposal?" she repeated, her voice less hostile now, but still guarded. "What kind of business?" She placed the bowl back on the table, giving him her full attention at the sound of his seriousness. "High-end products," he said, his tone firm. "Something refined, something that stands out." She exhaled sharply, her doubt clear. "That sounds expensive. If it fails, the losses would be huge. I can't afford that again. I can't bear that kind of failure anymore." Chen Ren leaned in slightly, his voice dropping as if sharing a secret only for her ears. "You don't have to think negatively all the time. Failure isn't a certainty." Her gaze wavered for a moment, but he pressed on. "You tried to save a blacksmithing workshop for your father. You bought it and poured everything into it, hoping to turn it into something grand. Even though you're well-versed in the basics of business, you lack one thing: innovation. That's where I come in." Tang Yuchio's fingers curled around the edge of the table, her expression unreadable, but Chen Ren could see the faint flicker of doubt turning into interest. "Innovation?" she echoed softly. He nodded, his gaze steady. "I'll bring innovation. You bring the structure. Together, we can build something that doesn't just survive, it thrives." For the first time since they began talking, Tang Yuchio looked at him not with suspicion or irritation, but with something close to hope. But she wasn't ready to admit it yet. "It sounds risky," she said, her voice quieter now. "All good things are," Chen Ren replied with a faint smile. "But this time, you won't be doing it alone." It seemed as if she allowed herself to consider the possibilities for a brief moment, but soon her expression shifted to one that clearly conveyed the question, "Have you lost your mind?" Her frown deepened as seconds passed, assessing him for any hint of deceit again. But after a long pause, she simply sighed, her shoulders drooping slightly. "If you're lying, I'll kick you out myself." Chen Ren chuckled. "You don't have that authority. Your father does. And let's be honest, do you really think the regular guards would be able to get me out?" He folded his arms, voice lowering to a serious tone. "But I'm not lying. This business will help you regain your lost honor. We'll build something that'll take the city by storm. Only if you want to. If you don't, then, well..." He shrugged. She stared at him, her expression unreadable as she considered his words. 40-60, she said, at last, her voice steady. "In my favor for the profits." Chen Ren raised an eyebrow, a small smirk playing on his lips. 50-50, he countered, unwavering. "I'm already doing you a favor by letting you in on the profits." She snickered, the tension in her posture easing just a bit. "I doubt you're going to put any money into this venture, and as for labor, I'll be the one doing most of it. Not to mention, I'm putting my last bit of savings into this. The split should be in my favor." He shook his head, his smile not faltering. "None of it matters without my ideas and innovation. Without me, This is just another failed business in the making. Chen Ren felt a pang of guilt settle in his chest. He was aware that the knowledge he held, the ideas, the innovation, weren't really his own. They came from Earth, from a world she knew nothing about. In a sense, he was taking advantage of her ignorance, using what he hadn't developed himself. But a little shamelessness could go a long way, and in this world, survival wasn't always about playing fair. Besides, if it meant helping her out of this mess and earning good money, he could live with it. The two of them leaned closer over the wooden table, their voices rising and falling like the tide as they haggled fiercely. Tang Yuchio's eyes sparkled with determination as she pushed for a larger share, her tone sharp and confident. You can't expect me to invest my last savings without a fair cut. I'm thinking at least 50-40 in my favor. Chen Ren crossed his arms, unyielding. That just sounds comical to me now. I'll agree to 50-50, but only if you want this to work. 50-50? That's not happening. You're not even putting in any capital, she shot back, her frustration evident. I'm the one risking everything here. And without my ideas, there's nothing worth investing or risking in at all, he countered, his voice steady. You need to recognize the value I bring to the table. She rolled her eyes, a scoff escaping her lips. Please, are you really valuing your grand ideas that highly? They're just words without a proper plan. How about 70-30? I need a cushion for my risks. 70-30? Don't make me laugh. You just increased your profits after asking 60. Chen Ren shook his head, a smirk on his face. You'll scare away any potential investors with those demands. You really think anyone will join you at that rate? If you want a partner, you'll have to meet me halfway. How about 60-40 then? That's still generous considering I'm the one bringing in the capital. 50-50. It's either that or no deal. Fine, she relented, with an exasperated huff. 50-50. Her eyes gleamed with a mix of skepticism and expectation as she added, but the next discussion will be when you bring me this so-called high-end product, and make sure it actually impresses me. With that, she stood, the bowls of noodles forgotten as she straightened her dress. Don't disappoint me, Chen Ren, she said coolly before turning on her heel and walking off into the city streets. Chen Ren watched her go, rubbing the back of his head in thought. The deal was set, but now came the hard part, delivering on his promise. Getting the product was, without a doubt, the toughest challenge ahead. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Now comes the real work, he muttered, casting a glance at the noodle stall. Then, realization struck him. Wait, she forgot to pay. Once the discussion with the young miss was over, Chen Ren spent the rest of the afternoon working at the noodle stall. The hustle and bustle of serving bowls of noodles to the waiting line kept him busy, but his mind was far from settled. The deal he struck with Tang Yuchio was the easy part, making promises and talking up grand ideas. Sure, in his mind, he had 1,000 concepts for high-end products, things that could revolutionize this city. He could picture them clearly: luxurious cosmetics, high-quality fabrics, herbal tonics. But as the hours ticked by and the day dragged into late afternoon, he realized something that chilled him more than he expected. This world wasn't like his own. The herbs he needed, the specific plants, the animals, none of them were familiar to him here. The flora and fauna he relied on for his ideas were different and foreign. What use was knowledge from another world if the fundamental building blocks were all wrong? Chen Ren rubbed his temple, staring out at the thinning crowd of customers. He didn't even have a good grasp of what was available locally. Without the right resources, his ideas were nothing more than fantasies. He needed a solid foundation in the herbal and animal life around the city. But therein lay the problem. Chen Ren had no books related to that. He had never been interested in herbology or biology. His knowledge from his past life was limited to what modern industry could produce. He didn't have the faintest clue how to identify rare herbs or unique ingredients in this world. And worse still, this city didn't seem to have a public library. He had asked around before, hoping for a place where he could dig up some information, but according to the servants, there was no such luxury here. Even Yalan, the cat, had been little help, though she had muttered some vague complaints about human knowledge being too scattered. When he'd brought up the idea to Xiaolan, She confirmed his suspicions. The local herbalists and doctors were fiercely protective of their knowledge, sharing only with their trusted apprentices. Trying to pry information out of them would take too much time, something he barely had. Chen Ren sighed, leaning against the stall's counter. His options were growing slimmer by the minute. There had to be another way. And then, a flicker of memory hit him. Something from Chen Ren's life here, something he had almost forgotten about. He straightened up, eyes narrowing as a thought crystallized. There was one place that might have what he needed. It wasn't a library, not in the traditional sense, but it was a place where books were plentiful. More importantly, it was a place where someone like him might just stumble upon the right book by sheer luck. His gaze turned resolute as he packed up the last of the stall's supplies, handing over the evening shift to Tang Xiulan. He didn't say much to her, just a brief nod before he turned and headed into the city, a singular thought guiding his steps. By the time Chen Ren arrived at his destination, the sun had dipped low in the sky, casting the streets in a soft orange glow. He found himself standing outside an unassuming tea shop, nestled between a pair of larger merchant buildings. To most, it looked like a simple, cozy place, a retreat for the weary, where people sipped tea and escaped the noise of the marketplace. But Chen Ren knew better. He glanced at the faded sign swaying in the evening breeze. It was a tea shop, yes, but it was also something more. A place with a surprisingly large collection of novels. Stories for the idle, Chen Ren muttered to himself. But maybe, just maybe, I might be able to find what I'm looking for here. He walked forward, pushing the door open, the faint scent of tea leaves and old parchment greeting him. The air inside was warm and cozy, and the soft murmur of voices made it feel almost too peaceful for the task at hand. He spotted a few patrons lounging about, their noses buried in novels as they sipped their drinks. His eyes scanned the shelves lining the walls. There, amidst the countless works of fiction, he hoped to find what he was looking for. The herbal knowledge he needed, the key to unlocking the next step of his plan. Surely, among all these books, there had to be something useful. A book, a scrap of knowledge, anything. Chen Ren strode inside, a small smile creeping across his face. Time to see what this tea shop really has to offer. Chapter 17. Lusty Snake and Rising Wood. The tea shop was nothing out of the ordinary. The lanterns, already lit, cast a warm glow that mingled with the lingering scent of brewing tea, creating an inviting atmosphere. Despite the late hour, the place was still full of life, with customers ranging from wandering cultivators to weary travelers, each nursing a steaming cup and engaging in low, murmured conversations. Chen Ren stepped through the entrance, his eyes scanning the familiar space. It had been a haunt of his, well, the previous Chen Ren's. He would come here occasionally, trailing behind friends with the same lofty aspirations, searching for volumes on the lives of famous cultivators. Those old legends were filled with tales of extraordinary feats, profound enlightenment, and battles that shook mountains. That Chen Ren had been enchanted by such stories, trying to emulate the speech and mannerisms of those ancient heroes. Perhaps it was this obsession that had made him so haughty, looking down on mortals as if they were dust beneath his feet. Chen's lips twisted into a half-smile at the memory, but his expression soon shifted into one of mild curiosity as he glanced around. The tea stall hadn't changed much. The scent of worn scrolls and ink mingled with the earthy aroma of the tea. Rows of shelves lined one side of the establishment, stacked with books and scrolls, each promising knowledge for those who sought it. Once a customer selected a book, they could choose to take a seat in one of the small cubicles, cramped spaces enclosed within wooden walls, offering a modicum of privacy, or sit at the open tables, reading amidst the buzz of conversation while sipping their tea. Chen Ren walked towards the shelves, his fingers brushing against the rough spines of the scrolls as he searched for something that might be of use. Most of the volumes were the same as he remembered. Biographies of storied cultivators, legends of ancient sects, and tedious records of lineages. He even caught sight of a few of the more absurdly long titles, works like The Celestial Sword That Cut Through the Humans and Heavens, or Heavenly Phoenix Rising from Ashes to Burn Everything into Ashes. Yet, buried among these, there were some books whose names made his eyebrows twitch. Volumes like Lusty Snake and The Rising Wood sat side by side with the more serious tomes, its title boldly displayed as if challenging anyone who dared to judge the content. Curiosity piqued, he reached for it. Only for research purposes, he muttered to himself, cracking open the pages. As he skimmed through the lines, he found that it wasn't the scandalous tale he expected. Instead, it detailed a bizarre story about a snake spirit that formed a bond with a tree beast, their journey through the wilderness, and their trials against various predators. The language, poetic and flowery, described their struggle to survive and thrive amidst hostile terrain, and there wasn't a single racy detail to be found. He shook his head, a wry smile playing on his lips as he placed the book back on the shelf. He continued to search, his eyes narrowing as he sought something more practical, treatises on rare herbs, bestiaries that cataloged the creatures of the surrounding forests, anything that might give him an edge. But to his growing disappointment, nothing of the sort seemed to exist among the shelves. The tea house, with great reputation for its book collection, had nothing but fanciful, questionable stories and endless odes to long-dead cultivators. Frowning, his gaze drifted toward the small desk nestled in the corner of the tea stall, where an old woman sat, her hair having lost its color now streaked with silver, bound up in a loose bun atop her head. Her face was wrinkled and sun-kissed, but her eyes resembled one of a hawk. She cradled a clay cup in her hands, sipping tea slowly and occasionally moving her eyes around the shop. His memories told him that she was the owner of the place. Deciding that she might have more insight into his search, he approached the desk, offering a polite bow. His eyes went to the label on the table. Ching He, her name must be. Good evening, Senior Ching He. I'm looking for a particular book if you'd be so kind as to assist me. Ching He looked up, one brow arching slightly, her eyes darting toward the shelves lining the walls. There are plenty of books around there, young one. Take your pick, she said, her voice creaky. I've seen the ones out there, but I can't find what I'm looking for. Specifically, I'm interested in herbs and beasts. A book that could give me detailed information on them. Ching He leaned back in her chair, the wooden legs creaking under the shift of her weight. She set down her cup with a soft clink, peering at him over its rim. Herbs and beasts, you say? This place isn't a sect library, boy. You want those kinds of books, then join a sect? He hesitated, then shook his head, meeting her gaze directly. I already tried. Failed the entrance exams. A brief, almost pitying chuckle escaped the woman's lips. Not all sects are the grand, sky-reaching ones. There are smaller ones, always looking for stray talents. Chen Ren shook his head. Not interested. I just need access to knowledge. That's all. I'm even willing to pay more. Ching He's expression didn't change. She picked up her cup again, taking a slow sip before setting it back down. Then you're out of luck. There are no secret collections here, no hidden tomes. If what you want isn't on those shelves, you might as well leave. As for money, you can pay for my tea and books on those shelves. Nothing more than that. Chen Ren let out a long sigh, nodding to himself as he considered her words. His mind briefly entertained the idea of using his status as a cultivator, or perhaps invoking his recent association with the Tang clan. But as he glanced back at Ching He, looking at the wrinkles around her eyes, he discarded that notion. Using his status here would be akin to acting like the previous Chen Ren, especially when he was just against an old woman. He needed a different method to get through her. Thank you anyway, he said, bowing again before turning back to the shelves. After some searching, he pulled out a book titled The Immortal Travels of Lu Jia. It was yet another biography of a cultivator and his turtle whose life had become the stuff of legend. Not the practical text he sought, but at least it might offer some inspiration. He settled down in one of the public seats, choosing a corner where the noise of the tea stall was muted, and cracked open the book. As he began to read, a shadow loomed over him, and he glanced up to find Ching He standing beside him, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. Here, she said gruffly, setting the cup down on the table beside him. Glad you found something to read. Chen Ren blinked, surprised, before offering her a small, genuine smile. Thank you. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a few coins and placing them on the table. She grabbed them without turning to leave. She didn't look back, but Chen Ren thought he saw the corners of her lips curl upward ever so slightly at the coins. He took a sip of the tea, savoring the warmth that spread through his chest, and let himself sink into the tales of Lu Jie, even as his mind continued to puzzle over the best way to find what he truly needed. His other hand turned the brittle pages of the biography. The dim glow of the lanterns cast shifting patterns on the floor, and the hum of conversation from the other patrons filled the air with a comforting background murmur. The tea was warm, smooth, and soothing, but his thoughts remained restless, circling back to Qinghe behind the counter. As he took another sip, a soft rustling reached his ears. A moment later, a familiar weight settled on the seat beside him, brushing against his arm. He glanced sideways and saw Yalan. The creature stretched leisurely, curling her tail around her paws, before it spoke through his mind. "It's good you didn't try to pester her," Yalan said, her gaze shifting toward Qinghe, who was now busy wiping down a dusty ledger. "That woman is strong." He raised an eyebrow, setting the book aside for a moment. "A cultivator?" Yalan nodded, the tip of her tail flicking lazily. "One that should be an elder of a sect at the very least. Dunno what she's doing here, hiding in plain sight." Chen Ren's gaze drifted back to Qinghe. Her mannerisms were unhurried, almost mundane. Just a regular shopkeeper tending to her tea stall. Yet, there was a precision to the way she moved. A calmness that seemed just a bit too steady for an elder who had supposedly lived among average folks all her life. He tried to see through the veil of ordinariness she wore like a cloak, but there was nothing to give her away. Everything about her, from the faint lines around her eyes to the way she drank, seemed unremarkable. But he couldn't dismiss what Yalan had said. If she truly was a hidden master, then it explained the knowledge in her advice earlier, her casual mention of joining a smaller sect. He had given her no direct clue that he was a cultivator when she suddenly mentioned the sect competition. Though, even mortals tried their luck in those sect competitions, hoping to secure a menial position within the sect's ranks. But she had spoken as if she knew he was a cultivator. He cast another glance her way, but she continued her work, her focus entirely on her task. Perhaps she had grown used to keeping her true nature hidden, blending into the background of this quiet corner of the world. From what he remembered, the tea stall had been around for over a decade, always present yet never standing out. And in all that time, she had never done anything to betray her strength, never once let slip the aura that clung to true cultivators like a faint shadow. Chen Ren sipped his tea thoughtfully, a plan beginning to form in his mind. If she was indeed a hidden master, there was a chance, however slim, that she possessed the knowledge he sought, the books he needed. Ancient masters often kept hidden troves of information, things that would never find their way onto the dusty shelves of a public stall. He just needed to find the right opportunity to make himself useful, to earn her favor, to perhaps gain access to whatever secrets she might be guarding. Yalan's voice broke into his thoughts, her tone curious. "So, what's the plan then? Sit here drinking tea until your cup runs dry?" Chen glanced down at Yalan, his lips curling into a faint smile. "I'll look out for the right opportunity to intervene. There's always something, some small act that might win a favor. If she's hiding her strength, then she's got her reasons, and people like that often need help they don't want to ask for." He took another slow sip, feeling the warmth seep into his chest. "If nothing comes up, then I'll have to play the long game. But I don't have much time for that." Yalan's tail twitched, her gaze shifting from Chen Ren to Qinghe once more. "Himph. Impatient as always, aren't you?" But there was no reproach in her tone, only a hint of amusement. Whether it took a moment or a month, he would find a way to crack open whatever mystery the old grandma held. After all, in a world of secrets and shadows, the right connections could be more valuable than any rare herb or elusive beast. And if she was truly a master, then beneath that ordinary exterior, she held more than a few keys to the knowledge he sought. Time drifted by slowly in the tea stall, the minutes bleeding into one another as Chen Ren sat in his corner, pretending to be absorbed in the dusty old biography. His gaze, however, frequently drifted over the rim of his cup to Qinghe at the counter. She continued with her routine, refilling teapots, arranging cups, and occasionally greeting new customers with a weary nod. The steady pace of her movements betrayed nothing of the hidden strength Yalan had hinted at. But even as he kept his eyes peeled, no opportunity presented itself. He watched as people came and went, workers, merchants, and the occasional scholar, all entering with the prospect of a warm drink or a brief respite from the day's troubles. Nothing of interest, nothing out of the ordinary. His second cup of tea turned cold. He ordered a third, and as the minutes stretched on, he began to wonder if he would spend the entire evening here without any progress. But just as the tea warmed his hands once more, the bells above the door chimed, announcing the arrival of a group of young women. Their attire marked them as scions of wealth, draped in robes of fine silk, embroidered with different patterns of flowers and mythical creatures. Gold-threaded tassels hung from their sleeves, swaying with every playful step. Jade bangles clinked softly on their wrists, and their hairpins shimmered in the lantern light, each one showing off their family's prosperity. Chen Ren's interest peaked as they made their way to the reception. They gathered around Qinghe, who set her teacup down with a soft clink, meeting their smiles with a polite but detached nod. "Ah, Grandma Qinghe, do you have any other books here?" one of the girls asked, her voice carrying the cultured tone of someone used to making requests. Qinghe regarded her with a raised eyebrow. "What kind are you looking for?" The girl gave a small sigh, adjusting the hem of her silken sleeve. "Most of the books here seem to cater to children or men. We've read through nearly all of the cultivation stories you have in stock. Isn't there anything different? Something more to our taste?" Qinghe's face remained impassive as she shook her head. "This is all I have, miss. If you're looking for something different, I suggest you try the merchants next time they come through town." The disappointment in the girls' expressions was clear, but they could do little but exchange glances and mutter among themselves before turning away, their footsteps carrying them out of the tea stall in a trail of silk and perfume. Chen Ren watched their retreating figures thoughtfully, a plan forming in his mind. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. With a quick breath, he downed the last of his tea and rose to his feet, striding toward Qinghe with purpose. She looked up at his approach, her expression turning from mild curiosity to a familiar wariness. "What do you want now?" she asked, voice flat. Chen Ren offered a polite smile, gesturing in the direction of the door where the girls had exited. "Those young misses. Don't you think you're losing customers by not catering to them? If you had books they wanted, they'd keep coming back, and they'd spend plenty of silver doing it." Qinghe shrugged, picking up her teacup again as if the matter was already settled. "Doesn't matter. I don't have any more books. And even if I wanted to get more, it's not easy. Merchants don't bring many these days, and the ones they do bring are mostly the same. Cultivation stories, tales for children, nothing more." Chen Ren leaned in slightly, his tone gaining a touch of enthusiasm. "What if I offered you a solution to that problem?" She eyed him skeptically, one brow arching as she set her cup down again. "And what solution would that be?" He straightened, letting a bit of confidence slip into his voice. "I could write a book, one that would appeal to those girls. You have a lot of young misses visiting your shop, don't you? If you had a story that they actually wanted to read, it could bring in more business. They'd come for the tea, stay for the book, and keep returning. Girls like them talk about everything to each other, so I'm pretty sure your business will boom." Qinghe's skepticism only deepened, her lips curving into a dry smile. "You don't look much like a writer to me." Chen Ren chuckled softly, spreading his hands in a disarming gesture. "Appearances can be deceiving, senior. Just give me a chance. If I can do it, will you let me have a look at the herbal books?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "I already told you, I don't have any of those. What part of that did you not understand? Maybe there are some in the back. It wouldn't hurt to take a look, would it? Just a small favor, if I manage to write something that brings more customers to your shop." Qinghe stared at him, her gaze as steady and unyielding as a mountain. For a moment, Chen Ren wondered if he had pushed too far, but he held his ground, his expression remaining calm and composed. Qinghe let out a long sigh, her breath carrying the weariness of someone who had seen too many schemes and empty promises. She took her time, letting her gaze sweep over Chen Ren, measuring him up from head to toe. Her eyes, sharp and judgmental, flicked briefly to Yalan lingering a few paces behind him. After a moment's pause, She folded her arms and gave a small, almost reluctant nod. Sure. If you can write up a good book that brings in more business, I'll search through what I have. But understand, there's no guarantee I'll find what you're looking for. Chen Ren's face lit up with a hint of satisfaction. That's good enough for me, he replied, his voice carrying a note of enthusiasm that hadn't been there before. Without waiting for her to change her mind, he turned on his heel, striding toward the door. If he hadn't controlled himself, he'd be bouncing on his feet. But good thing, he was still sane. Yalan padded after him, her tail swishing lazily behind. As he left the tea shop, the air seemed cooler and crisper. Or maybe it was just his mind. Chapter 18. Qinghe. Qinghe's hand trembled slightly as she brought the teacup to her lips, savoring the warmth that seeped through the delicate porcelain. Her shop, filled with neatly stacked books and the faint scent of aged paper, was brightened by the sunlight pouring through the window. The gentle steam rising from the tea seemed to swirl in harmony with the rhythm of her thoughts, as if time itself had slowed to match her leisurely pace. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the city's chaos was visible. The laughter of children, the cries of merchants hawking their wares, the clattering of horse-drawn carts. All the familiar sounds of a mortal city busy with its daily routine. She observed it as one might view the ripples on a distant lake, present yet removed, the mundane happenings of a world she had once left behind and had returned to. Time, she mused, moved so swiftly for mortals. 10 years, gone in a blink. In the world of the mundane, seasons changed, children grew, and elders passed on. But for her, a decade was no more than a brief interlude, a period where no great disturbances rocked the heavens or stirred the silent flow of her chi. There had been no furious rival sects to contend with, and no ancient blood feuds revived. Just quiet days, evenings filled with novels, and the simple pleasure of anonymity. She sipped her tea again, feeling the warmth trickle down her throat. Her lips curled slightly, a rare smile that creased her otherwise serene features. She thought of the gray-haired men who sometimes lingered near her stall, attempting to catch her eye with their clumsy charm. Oh, how they tried. Offering small gifts, their flattery almost amusing even in this age. She did not desire their company. They were as uninteresting as stones by the roadside. Yet, she relished the attention, that small acknowledgement of her existence and charm that hadn't faded away even with wrinkles. After all, who among those who once sought to ascend to the heavens could resist a little admiration? Even the most aloof cultivators, draped in their robes of mystery, couldn't resist the allure of fame. That was why they competed in endless tournaments, displayed their prowess for the masses, and even paid bards to spin stories of their exploits. Half of the novels cluttering her shelves were ghostwritten by such cultivators, faintly disguised exaggerated accounts of their own lives. They claimed to be above mortal affairs, yet how many of them yearned for the reverence of those they dismissed as insignificant? The truth was, even the lofty required validation from the masses they deemed beneath them. She sighed contentedly, closing her eyes to bask in the warmth of her tea and her thoughts. A good life, a peaceful life, she murmured to herself, savoring the words like a fine cup of tea. It was a mantra she had repeated so many times over these quiet years, almost convincing herself that it could last forever. But then, the door creaked open, slicing through the tranquility of the moment. Her eyes snapped open, her gaze sharpening as she peered at the shadowed figure standing at the threshold. Qinghe's brow furrowed, her grip tightening around the fragile cup, a small crack spreading through the porcelain. There he stood, the uninvited guest, the one who could shatter this piece she had worked so hard to weave. He appeared unassuming enough, dressed in simple robes, his expression as neutral as a calm lake. Yet she could sense the faint, irregular hum of his dantian beneath his surface, like a flame flickering in a breeze. He wasn't much. No prodigious talent, no aura of destiny swirling around him. A cultivator of middling rank, barely a foot into the path that defied heaven's will. She narrowed her eyes, scrutinizing the barely perceptible ripples of energy emanating from him. A third star body forging cultivator, perhaps, or fourth if she was generous. Nothing that should pose a danger to her. Her lips twisted into a thin line. The youth was no danger on his own. Just another hopeful soul chasing the promise of immortality, like so many others who had come before him. But then she saw it, lurking behind him, a shadow moving with liquid grace. A sleek, pristine white cat. Its fur slipped past the door frame, padding soundlessly into the room. The cat's eyes gleamed with an unsettling intelligence, too bright and knowing for any ordinary beast. Qinghe's heart tightened at the sight. That cat, a creature that did not belong in this mortal city. Qinghe's gaze lingered on the spot where the white cat had last been seen, her pristine form slipping away with unnerving ease. A spirit beast, she was sure of it, and not just any lowly creature that prowled the edges of town, but one with a strength that could hide itself even from her senses. At the very least, it was a peak Foundation realm beast, possibly even at the elusive Meridian expansion realm. She didn't like either option. Beasts of such caliber didn't casually wander into mortal settlements like this, let alone follow around a cultivator of such modest talent. Yet, the most curious thing of all was the beast's behavior. Instead of ruling over the weaker being, it followed him, acting like a pet, docile and obedient. She had seen the cat nestling against his legs, her eyes glinting with a peculiar amusement, almost as if she was playing a game Qing he couldn't quite decipher. And now, for the last 2 days, she hadn't seen the hide or hair of either the cat or the young cultivator. She had almost convinced herself that they'd moved on, leaving her to her simple life once more. "So, it comes to this," she muttered under her breath, the tea cooling in her hand, her gaze never leaving the visitor who had just stepped into her quiet corner of her shop. He strode toward her, a bright smile on his face that was almost annoyingly cheerful. She straightened, letting out a slow breath to steady herself. "Why are you here today?" she asked, her voice clipped as she peered over her cup of tea. "Back for more books?" The young man shook his head, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "No, Senior Qinghe. I'm here to fulfill my end of the bargain." She frowned, setting her teacup down with a faint clink. "Oh." Her tone held a trace of curiosity, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. "So, you wrote a novel?" His grin widened, pride shining in his eyes. "Yes, enough to become a big hit with the young girls." She chuckled dryly, the noise escaping through her nose. "A big hit, is it?" She studied him for a moment, then reached out as he handed her a thin, bound volume. Qinghe's hands brushed the rough pages, feeling the weight of the book and, perhaps, the weight of his ambitions. She squinted at the title and flipped open to the first page. "Very well then," she said with a touch of amusement in her voice. "Let me read." The young cultivator watched eagerly as she scanned the opening lines, leaning in slightly as if hoping to catch her first reaction. Qing sighed softly, her fingers tapping the edge of the book. What could this child possibly write, being so young and naive? She wondered. Her mind drifted back to the tales she'd read over the decades, stories of grand battles, tragic love, and ascension to heights no mortal could fathom. Surely, he would not grasp the depth that such stories required. Yet as her eyes traced over the words, a flicker of surprise crossed her face. Her reading slowed, and she glanced up at him, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Liang Shan and Hua Yun." She emphasized the names in a tone thick with the cadence of her region, rendering his words awkwardly. "Who is this Shaku per anyway that's credited as the writer of the original?" The young cultivator's grin faltered slightly, but he regained his composure quickly, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. "Shakespeare. It's an old tale from my place of birth," he explained. "I just adapted it to be about cultivators. The original story was about 2 mortal families who ruled a city and their children. Well, they fell in love despite their family's feud." She scoffed lightly, a note of disbelief creeping into her voice. Mortal families ruling a city? What nonsense. How could such a story capture anyone's interest? Mortals can barely keep a village in order, let alone a city. "It's just a story, Senior Qinghe. It's not meant to be taken so seriously. And I made it different, you know." Added some of those forbidden techniques and ancient bloodlines that I saw around the books in your shop." He smiled, and his words held a hint of pride. Qinghe's lips twitched, and she found herself not knowing whether to take him seriously or not. We'll see if your little story has any depth to it. A tale of love and conflict, adapted to the realm of cultivators. It's not an easy thing to write." She returned to the pages, immersing herself in the story of clashing clans, forbidden cultivation techniques, and tragic love. Yet even as she read, she kept one eye on the young man, observing the eagerness in his expression. He watched her reactions carefully, as if seeking validation. Not so different from those old men on the street, pining for a bit of her attention. And perhaps in that small way, he was a true cultivator after all. Yet in the back of her mind, the shadow of that spirit beast lingered, reminding her that things were never as simple as they seemed. Qinghe adjusted her glasses, the faint flickering of candlelight casting shadows over her face, as she began to read the first page of the young cultivator's manuscript. The story started with two rival guardian sects. One, the Sky Shroud sect, known for their mastery of sword chi, and the other, the Verdant Stream sect, masters of spirit arts. The protagonists, a young man from Sky Shroud and a woman from Verdant Stream, met under a red maple tree that grew on the boundary between their sects. Despite the tension between their factions, the two found themselves drawn to one another, their chance meetings turning into whispered conversations about the nature of cultivation, their dreams, and the harsh duties they bore for their respective sections. Qinghe smirked as she read this part, recognizing the telltale signs of a budding romance, laced with the tension of forbidden encounters. It was the kind of tale that drew in young hearts, the thrill of love crossing boundaries. As she read further, the sect elders grew suspicious of their young disciples' secret meetings. The lovers, caught between loyalty to their sects and their feelings for each other, decided to meet one last time under a legendary maple tree. The young cultivator wrote of a moonlit night, where spiritual energy shimmered around them, and the air was thick with unspoken words and regrets. He captured the scene well, she had to admit. His prose managed to evoke the coldness of the night and the warmth of their last embrace. But, as such stories go, tragedy soon followed. The elders of the Sky Shroud sect struck first, unleashing a storm of sword chi that tore through the forest where the two met. Not to be outdone, the Verdant Stream elders retaliated with devastating spirit arts, turning the moonlit scene into a battlefield of clashing auras. The couple tried to escape the carnage, but their enemies would not relent. With a final, desperate use of forbidden techniques, they turned their power inward, choosing to end their own lives rather than let the sects tear them apart. As she reached the last lines, describing their hands clasped together, their chi fading like the last breath of the maple leaves around them, Qinghe realized her tea had long grown cold. She set the manuscript down, feeling the heaviness and bittersweetness of the story settle in her chest. Slowly, she raised her gaze to the young cultivator, who watched her with a hopeful, yet nervous, smile. "This is actually pretty good," she said, her voice tinged with reluctant admiration. She leaned back, fingers tapping on the armrest of her chair. "How were you able to write something like this?" The young man's smile grew wider, though he maintained a humble air. "It's an adaptation, like I said. I heard it as a tale rather than read it whole. Took some time to adapt it properly, to make the dialogue flow and fit the immortal world, you know? But it turned out well." She studied him for a moment, tapping her finger thoughtfully against the book. "It might actually work. You should consider a career as a writer rather than a cultivator. I'm sure many sects would be willing to sponsor someone who can weave stories like this. It's rare to find a talent like yours." He chuckled softly, scratching the back of his head. "I'll think about it. If my current path doesn't work out, maybe I'll take up your advice." He paused, and then his expression turned serious as he shifted the topic. "About the book, are you satisfied with the one that I wrote? Will you give me what I seek?" Qinghe glanced at him, then back at the manuscript he'd written. "It's nicely done, even if I haven't had a chance to test whether the young girls would find it captivating. But the writing is solid, so I'll give you a chance." She stood up, smoothing out her robes. "Besides, I found a book that might interest you. Come with me." She led him to a narrow stairway at the back of the tea shop, the wooden steps creaking softly beneath their feet. The white cat appeared again, slipping through the shadows to follow them, its eyes glinting with that same amused intelligence. The young man followed her, his curiosity piqued as they made their way to a small room, where a worn bookshelf stood against one wall, filled with ancient tomes. She motioned to a simple chair by a small table. "Sit, and don't touch anything," she warned, casting him a stern look before turning to search through the bookshelf. He sat obediently, watching as she thumbed through dusty scrolls and leather-bound volumes until she found what she was looking for. Carefully, she pulled out a thin, worn book and placed it in his hands. "I think this one might be to your liking," she said, her tone softer than before as if a hint of nostalgia touched her words. "But remember, I don't give out my treasures lightly." With that, she left him in the room, heading back down the creaking stairs. As she reached her desk again, she couldn't help but glance once more at the manuscript he had left behind. She traced a finger over the cover, considering the young man's story. It had been a while since a tale had stirred something in her, something that made her want to read it again, to see if she had missed any layers beneath its simple telling. She settled back into her chair, opened the first page, and began reading once more, this time savoring each word and searching for the subtext that might lie hidden beneath the prose. Because she was sure there was more to it than what was presented, and she always liked a good, calm challenge. In the comparatively dark back room, Chen Ren took a moment to survey the shelves, his eyes glinting with curiosity. It was clear that Qing had more information tucked away than she let on. Ancient scrolls and old tomes, their spines cracked with age, filled every inch of the wooden shelves. He felt a twinge of excitement, knowing that this place held more than just dusty records. It held secrets. He sat down at the small table and glanced at the book Qing had handed him. Its cover was simple and unadorned, but the faded ink on the spine read The Tinge Flora and Hidden Beasts by Wu Yanshi. He flipped open the first page, the scent of old parchment wafting up, mingling with the faint aroma of incense from the shop below. The book started with an introduction about the author, a wandering cultivator who had spent decades exploring remote regions, recording details about plants and creatures seldom seen in the more civilized parts of the realm. It was a rare find, one that could easily be overlooked by someone less knowledgeable. As he read through the pages, Chen Ren skimmed past the sections on rare herbs that grew deep in spirit-infused mountains and hidden valleys, focusing instead on what could be found closer to the city. His goal was clear: herbs with pleasing fragrances. If he could find a plant that had properties to soothe the mind, or to subtly ward off lesser spirit beasts, even better. And then there were the beasts themselves. Any parts that could be used for their alchemical properties would be a bonus. He paused at a passage about hoofprint fern, a rare plant known for its golden-veined leaves that glowed in the moonlight. It had calming properties, often used by cultivators to enhance meditation, but it thrived only near ancient, undisturbed lakes, far from the bustling life of the city. Next, he found a description of violet dawnroot, a bright red herb with a subtle, citrusy scent. It was said to help focus the mind when burned as incense. It grew on the sunlit slopes of hills, needing space and elevation. He frowned. While not impossible to acquire, it was not the convenient solution he sought. Flipping a few more pages, he found a section on spirit beasts, each profile painstakingly recorded with details of their habits and habitats. A sketch of a night stalker lynx caught his eye, a creature known for its shadow affinity and prized for its dark-furred pelt, which could be used in making concealment talismans. But it was far beyond his current strength, even if he did manage to track one down. He moved on, noting its properties but knowing it was out of reach. After a while, he stumbled upon a simple entry: Silver Mist Blossom. The name didn't seem particularly grand, but the more he read, the more it piqued his interest. It was a humble herb, found near riverbanks, with delicate petals that shimmered faintly in the morning mist. The blossom emitted a gentle fragrance that was said to calm nerves and aid in sleep. But more than that, it had a subtle effect of repelling lesser spirit beasts and pests, making it valuable to protect those who worked with other, more temperamental herbs. This was the kind of plant he had been looking for. Something easy to find locally, with practical uses that could enhance the atmosphere of his quarters and keep unwanted pests at bay. He traced a finger over the illustration, imagining them blossom along the rivers that wound near the outskirts of the city. Chapter 19. Foresting. Chen Ren hunched over a small desk in his room. The only light came from a half-melted candle. His brush moved swiftly, filling the scroll with characters that came to his mind. He paused, the tip hovering over the paper as he thought of the recent encounter with the old lady at the tea house. A smile tugged at his lips, just barely there. The deal with her had been sort of a gamble of its own, but one that turned out better than he had expected. He had proposed writing a story, one of those romantic tales popular on Earth, but not just any tale. One that could tug at heartstrings and spark a fluttering in the hearts of young women. There was a problem, though. He had never really read those kinds of books back in his world, just watched them in movies. So, he took the fragments he remembered, twisted them with his imagination and stuff he had read about cultivation, and poured them into the scrolls over the last 2 days. Writing here had come with its surprises. His thoughts, once sluggish when it came to putting words down on paper, now flowed like a river. Once he finished the story, Qinghe's approval arrived quickly, allowing him to obtain the book on herbs and beasts he had been searching for. Yet, the true treasure wasn't just in the book she'd given him. It was in the dusty, cluttered shelves he'd glimpsed behind her, shelves filled with scrolls and tomes that looked far more valuable than mere stories. Cultivation manuals, techniques, and perhaps even secret arts lay within that room. If he played his cards right, he might get access to those secrets too. But those aspirations would have to wait. Chen Ren put the scroll aside, pushing thoughts of ancient techniques and hidden power from his mind for now, and focusing on his task at hand, from where he was in his room. All right, so, focus. He forced himself to look at the notes he'd made in his notebook. His first goal was much simpler. Herbs? Since his noodle stall was working well, he had thought a lot on his second business idea and landed on a product that he would be able to earn a lot out of, especially with xianxia, fragrances, makeup, and hygiene products. It was an idea born from a class he'd taken back in his previous life when perfumes and their crafting had been little more than an idle curiosity. Yet now, that knowledge held the potential for a lot of profit. He picked up another sheet, dipping his brush once more as he began to scribble notes. Memories of perfume-making techniques surfaced, thoughts threading through the delicate process of creating a fragrance. He jotted down the key ideas that had lingered in his mind. The use of essential oils for heart notes, the balancing of top notes like citrus to create an immediate scent, and the heavier, lasting base notes, musk, sandalwood, or even something rarer. It was a process that required patience, an art of blending nature's essence into a single, captivating aroma. Chen Ren's brush moved swiftly, laying out the steps for his perfume-making process as he included his earthly knowledge with the herbs he had read about. He wrote about selecting top, middle, and base notes that he thought would fit, whispering lily for the initial burst, Martha wood for depth, and silver mist bloom to anchor the blend. He detailed how to combine them, starting with a few drops of each in a small bottle, adding alcohol to carry the fragrance, and letting it rest for days to meld the scents. He noted the importance of testing the mixture on the skin, adjusting with more alcohol if too strong, and recording each variation to refine what he'd have made. A faint, high-pitched sound cut through his focus, like the creak of old wood or the whisper of an unseen presence. Chen Ren's hand stilled, his breath catching in his throat as his senses sharpened. His gaze darted around the murkily lit room, the tension coiling through his muscles like a spring. Did one of the creditors send an assassin after me? No, it shouldn't be. But I still need to check. He slowly pushed back from the desk, his eyes scanning the corners, each shadow stretching longer than it should under the wavering candlelight. The silence hung heavy, every beat of his heart echoing in his ears. Then, he spotted the source of the sound. A small, scraggly rat, scuttling along the edge of the room, its tiny claws scraping against the wooden floor. Chen Ren exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He leaned back, feeling the tightness in his shoulders ease. The rat was a scrawny creature, its fur matted and rough, the pale light casting shadows over its twitching whiskers. It paused for a heartbeat, its tiny eyes glinting like dark beads in the candlelight as it met Chen Ren's gaze. A cornered look passed between them, one of primal fear on the rat's part and a flash of something else, a sudden whim, in Chen Ren's. He stood up slowly, the wooden chair creaking beneath him. His lips twisted into a grin. "I didn't know I had rats in my room," he muttered, brushing a loose strand of hair behind his ear. Then, an idea took root, his grin widening. "Maybe I can try catching it, as a treat for that high and mighty cat." He chuckled under his breath at the thought and, without further hesitation, lunged toward the rat. But the rat, sensing the danger, moved at a godly speed. It darted between his legs, slipping past the edge of the desk, and scrambled over a stack of scrolls piled in the corner. Chen Ren, not to be outdone, dove after it, his fingers just brushing against the coarse fur before it wriggled free, leaping toward his bed. He nearly stumbled, catching himself on the bedpost as he shifted through the tight space of his room, his mind racing to keep up with the rat's frantic scurrying. He winced as his elbow knocked into a porcelain cup, sending it spinning across the desk before it wobbled back to a stop. He had to be careful. One wrong move, and he'd leave a mess for Tang Xilan to clean up, not to mention the damage to his already limited belongings. The rat seemed to sense the challenge, scampering with renewed speed, its tiny claws skittering over his notes, then darting under a small chest that held his writing supplies. Chen Ren huffed in frustration, quickly closing the distance, leaping to block its path. For a moment, they both froze. Chen Ren, with his arm outstretched, and the rat, quivering in the corner. With a final quick motion, he managed to trap the creature beneath his hands, feeling it squirm against his palms. He grinned, ready to praise himself for the little victory, but then a voice from the doorway cut through his moment of triumph like a blade. "What are you doing, human?" It was a low, annoyed tone, carrying the unmistakable haughtiness of a creature who had seen far too many years to be amused by such antics. Chen Ren froze, turning slowly to see Yalan standing in the doorway, her amber eyes narrowed to slits, the tip of her tail twitching impatiently. She regarded him with a disdainful look that could have made any mortal feel foolish. He raised his hands, displaying the wriggling rat with a sheepish grin. "I thought you might appreciate a fresh catch," he offered, trying to inject a bit of charm into his voice. "You know, a snack?" Yalan's glare sharpened, her whiskers twitching with irritation. "Do you think I would stoop so low to eat such a filthy creature?" she replied, her voice dripping with scorn. She cast a disdainful glance at the rat. Even a hungry stray would turn its nose up at such a pitiful offering. "I have some standards, human. If you want to feed me, try something more refined. I'd rather eat mud than a rat." Chen Ren flinched, his shoulders sagging as he sighed and released the rat, which immediately darted away, disappearing into a crack in the wall. He watched it vanish with exasperation and amusement, muttering under his breath, "Well, I tried my best for you, you know." Yalan, however, only smirked, a flash of amusement in her eyes that quickly turned serious. She flicked her tail toward the door. "If you truly wish to be useful, stop playing with vermin and start moving. We need to make our way to the forest and return before midnight. The window of opportunity is closing, and we need to get on with your training." Chen Ren straightened, dusting off his hands as he eyed her warily. "What's this about, anyway? And what kind of training are we talking about?" Yalan turned her head. "You'll find out when we get there," she said. "Now, hurry up. The herbs we seek will not wait, and neither will your training." Chen Ren moved through the mist that curled around the city, his steps careful yet swift, Yalan walking silently at his side. The lanterns that hung from the edges of rooftops did little to pierce the thick veil that blanketed everything in sight. The mist clung to him, cold and damp, and each breath drew in tendrils of vapor that seeped into his lungs. The city's boundary had always been like this at night. No matter how clear the day was, once the sun dipped below the horizon and everything turned dark, the fog rolled in, settling over the city like an ancient habit. Chen Ren had overheard countless theories about it since arriving. Rumors spun by merchants, old scholars, and idle city folks who enjoyed the mystery of it all. Some said it was the work of the sect master from the Soaring Sword sect, his power so great that he could summon an array to ward off beasts from the nearby forest, keeping them from straying too close to the city's walls. Others believed it was the result of a natural formation, a confluence of spiritual energies that gathered each night, creating a fog that acted as a barrier. Then there were the more mundane explanations, tales of strange plants that grew along the city's borders, exhaling mist as they absorbed the moon's light, or ancient streams hidden beneath the earth, releasing the vapor into the cool night air. Whatever the cause, the fog had been a fixture of the city for centuries, an unchanging fact of life that everyone learned to accept. Chen Ren, however, had little interest in deciphering its origins. It served its purpose tonight, helping to mask his movements as he and Yalan slipped through the twisting paths that led to the city's edge. The mist muffled the sounds of their footsteps, and he moved like a fox, covering a large distance in a matter of minutes, again thankful for the fact that he had been transmigrated as a cultivator. As they approached the outer gates, the outline of two guards materialized through the fog, their figures indistinct but solid against the shifting veil of mist. Their armor clinked softly as they turned, their expressions obscured beneath helmets that reflected the faint glow of nearby lanterns. But when Chen Ren revealed the faint glimmer of his cultivation aura, they barely gave him a second glance. One of them, an older man with a streak of silver in his beard, grunted a curt acknowledgement and bowed slightly before waving him through without so much as a question. Since the city had cultivators, guards seemed to let them be and not interfere. He was sure that he wasn't the only one who had thought of training in the nearby forest. Chen Ren slipped past the gate with a nod, feeling the slight tension in his shoulders ease. He had grown used to this reaction from most guards. He had discovered that most common folk treated cultivators with a blend of awe and wariness. It was a small advantage, but one he'd learned to use well. The mist beyond the gate was thicker still. He could barely see through the thick fog, but he knew that the forest should be in the distance. Chen Ren's breath formed soft clouds before him, mingling with the drifting vapor as he trudged forward, Yalan moving with unerring grace beside him. "Keep up," Yalan said, her voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the quiet. "We don't have time to waste. If we delay too long, we'll miss our chance." Chen Ren gritted his teeth, adjusting his stride to match her pace. The mist wrapped around them, swallowing the city behind and leaving only the path ahead. He moved deeper into the forest, the shadows shifting around him as the mist thinned, replaced by the looming silhouettes of ancient trees. He had initially planned to gather the herbs in the morning when the sun would illuminate the undergrowth, making the search easier. But Yalan had insisted on venturing out at night, her reasoning delivered with her usual disdainful tone. According to her, training under the moon's glow would force him to adapt to the challenges of nighttime. Nocturnal beasts often come out during this hour, and if he was going to learn how to deal with cultivation shenanigans, it was important to fight them. "Nocturnal beasts have their dangers," she had said, her tail swishing with a faint hiss through the air. "Many of them become stronger under the moon's lunar chi, their instincts sharper. It's the perfect time for training. Besides, no one will be around to interrupt us." Chen Ren had reluctantly agreed, knowing that she had a point. Moreover, nighttime brought out not only predators that moved with deadly grace, but also certain plants to bloom. Herbs that hid their true qualities during the day, their petals and leaves only unfurling in the moonlight to release their potent essence. He had a few of such herbs in his list, and if he wanted to make a perfume that could truly captivate people, he needed to gather them. The forest was alive with soft rustlings and distant calls, sounds that threaded through the quiet like a constant, murmuring breath. He moved carefully over the uneven ground, the notes he had scrawled earlier clutched behind him in a bag. The mist lingered here, draped low over the ground, obscuring the roots and rocks that threatened to trip him with every step. His eyes moved between the shadows, scanning the undergrowth for any sign of the herbs he sought. After what felt like hours of searching, he spotted the faint glimmer of moonlight reflecting off a cluster of leaves, their edges lined with a pale, silver sheen. He crouched down, brushing aside the underbrush to reveal a low-growing plant, its buds glowing faintly in the dark. "Martha Wood," he muttered to himself, recognizing the herb from his notes. It was known for its fragrant oil and smelled like lavender, a key ingredient that could add a lingering, mysterious scent to his perfume. Carefully, he plucked the leaves, mindful not to damage the delicate roots that held the plant to the soil. He tucked them into a small pouch, his fingers working with the precision of someone who had done this before, albeit in a different world. He straightened up, his gaze sweeping the shadows again, his ears straining for any signs of movement. With Yalan by his side, Chen Ren didn't feel the same sense of dread he might have if he were alone. She rarely showed it, but he could sense her power, a quiet, coiled strength beneath her haughty demeanor. If something truly dangerous emerged, he knew she could handle it. It allowed him to focus on his task without constantly looking over his shoulder, without that creeping fear that something might be stalking him through the darkness. He found another herb tucked near the base of a twisted tree, its flowers closed like tiny fists, waiting for the moonlight to coax them open. This one, a whispering lily, was known for its faint, almost ethereal scent that could lend a subtle layer to his creation. He gently harvested the blossoms, placing them next to the other leaves in his pouch. Satisfied with his progress, he started toward a small riverbank nestled deeper in the woods. He simply followed the waters, trying to find what he needed: silver mist bloom. But before he could move further, he felt Yalan suddenly halt in her tracks. Her ears twitched and she fixed her gaze toward a dark cluster of trees beyond the lake's edge. "It seems like you might finally encounter a beast worthy of my taste," she remarked, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Chen Ren stopped, turning to face her. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his brows furrowing as he tried to peer through the shadows. "A beast is nearby," Yalan replied, a hint of amusement in her tone. "A Tier 1 creature, nothing you should fear. But it's enough for some practice. You need to fight it." He stiffened, glancing toward the darkness where Yalan's eyes were fixed. His pulse quickened, a mixture of nervousness and reluctant excitement stirring in his chest. "Are you sure I can fight it? I don't think I told you before, but the only beast I fought in my world was a small swarm of mosquitoes," he admitted, feeling the weight of his unease settle over him. "Also, I only know one fist technique, and even that isn't very polished. It's just a Tier 1 beast. If things go poorly, I'll pull you out before you get hurt," she replied, the confidence in her tone leaving little room for argument. Chen Ren swallowed, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knew that if he wanted to survive in this world, he had to confront this fear sooner or later. The structure of this world, built on the strength of cultivators and the endless struggle against beasts and rivals, demanded courage. Better to start with a small step under the watchful eye of his unusual mentor than to be caught unprepared when real danger came knocking. "All right," he said slowly, nodding as if to reassure himself. "Let's do this." He clenched his fists, feeling a tingling in his core as he tried to steady his breathing, and began to move forward. They moved deeper into the forest until the trees began to thin, following the shimmering surface of the river. The mist had settled low here, hugging the ground and drifting like ghostly veils over the water's edge. But what drew Chen Ren's attention wasn't the serene view. It was the grisly scene unfolding just a few steps from the shore. Near a cluster of gnarled roots that twisted into the water, a creature crouched, tearing into the carcass of a normal deer with savage hunger. It resembled a rat and was nearly as large as a wild boar, its matted, bristling fur slick with dark stains of fresh blood. Its long, crooked teeth gleamed in the moonlight as it dug into the flesh, muscles rippling beneath its coarse hide with every vicious bite. Tufts of fur were missing in places, revealing patches of rough, scarred skin, as if it had survived countless brawls in its time. Its eyes, small and beady, glowed with a faint red light, casting an eerie reflection on the bloodied ground around it. Even crouched over its meal, the creature exuded a wild, untamed ferocity, the scent of blood mingling with the damp air, sharp enough to make Chen Ren wrinkle his nose. The deer lay limp beneath the monstrous rat's claws, its legs bent at unnatural angles, neck twisted and broken. Chen Ren swallowed hard, his breath catching as he tried to keep his voice steady. This thing is really Tier 1? he asked, his gaze flicking nervously from the rat beast to Yalan. It looks tough. Yalan, perched on a nearby rock with a bored expression, simply flicked her tail and gave him a sidelong glance. It's nothing you can't handle, she replied, a hint of a challenge in her tone. Don't worry. But Chen Ren couldn't quite quell the nerves that tightened in his chest as he took in the rat beast's powerful limbs and the sharp, glinting claws that dug into the deer's flesh. Compared to the small rat he had fought, this one looked more like a predator than prey. He took a deep breath, steeling himself before stepping forward, feeling the cool air hitting his face. The rat beast's ears twitched, and it jerked its head up, crimson eyes locking onto Chen Ren. Its mouth hung open, revealing rows of sharp, crooked teeth stained with the remnants of its meal. They stared at each other, the air thick with the tension of the encounter. The creature's nostrils flared as it took in his scent, and for a heartbeat, everything was still. Just the faint rustle of leaves and the quiet lap of water against the shore. Then, with a guttural snarl that seemed to rattle the very trees, the rat beast lunged. It moved with a speed that belied its bulky frame, a blur of matted fur and flashing claws. Chen Ren's breath hitched, and his feet seemed to root themselves to the spot as he watched the mass of muscle and fangs hurtling toward him, his mind going blank with the sudden rush of terror. The ground seemed to shake beneath the creature's charge, and all Chen Ren could do was brace himself as every cell of his body came alive with the sound of snapping branches and the beast's roar that almost deafened him. Chapter 20. Spicy Herbs. The air seemed to thicken as the rat beast charged, its claws scrabbling across the rocky ground. Chen Ren's muscles tensed, his mind blanked for a split second, time stretching unnaturally. Fear prickled at the edge of his thoughts, locking him in place. He could almost hear the rhythmic pounding of his own heartbeat as he froze, watching the beast bear down on him. But then, a stray thought broke through the haze. Move. Electricity crackled around his fists as he snapped out of his stupor, and with a forceful exhale, he drew upon the power of the thundering fist, a technique he'd drilled countless times. His right arm whipped forward, muscles straining, and his fist collided with the rat's bony shoulder. A shockwave of energy burst from the impact, throwing the rat several feet backward, its body skidding across the dirt. Chen Ren's breath came in sharp gasps, and he glanced down at his fist, still tingling with residual energy. Surprise lit up his face. So this is thundering first? But before he could dwell on the thought, a sharp voice cut through his reverie. Focus. The blood snout isn't finished yet. It was Yalan's voice, stern as always, her amber eyes locked on the struggling beast. Blood snout. So, that's what this ugly thing is called. His gaze snapped back to the rat, just in time to see it push itself up from the ground, its bloodshot eyes fixed on him. It let out a high-pitched screech that echoed through the trees, its rage palpable. Without a moment's hesitation, it charged at him again, the ground trembling beneath its heavy footfalls. Chen Ren felt the rush of panic claw at him but forced it down, inhaling deeply. He clenched his fists, letting the lightning pool around his legs. The air around his calves crackled, and in the blink of an eye, he moved, his body disappearing just as the rat's claws slashed through the empty space where he had stood. Chen Ren reappeared several paces away, lightning still crackling around his legs. This was a lightning step, a movement technique that he had practiced in the back alleys of the city, a technique that channeled lightning through the body, making him as quick as a lightning flash. The previous Chen Ren used it often. Hence, despite his lack of practice, his body seemed to remember the rhythm of it, every muscle attuned to the technique's flow. He dashed to the side, blurring into motion, leaving arcs of electricity trailing behind him. The bloodsnout's claws slashed at him again and again, but each time, they met only the empty air. With every dodge, Chen Ren countered with a strike, his fists slamming into the rat's body, the impact ringing through the forest like distant thunder. Yet, even as his attacks connected, a sinking realization grew in his mind. Each punch drove the rat back, but its tough, bristly hide absorbed the brunt of his blows. Bruises formed beneath its fur, but the beast barely slowed. its rage driving it forward through the pain. Chen Ren risked a glance towards Yalan, his unspoken plea for guidance clear in his eyes. But she simply watched from the shadows, her expression unreadable. She shook her head, a silent message. This is your battle. His thoughts swirled as he ducked under another wild swipe from the rat. What am I doing wrong? The thundering fist technique was supposed to be a powerful, decisive blow, one that could shatter bones and rend flesh. Yet, his attacks barely seemed to scratch the surface of the bloodsnout's defenses. He could move swiftly with lightning step, weaving through its attacks like a dancer amidst a storm, but speed alone wasn't enough. Another exchange, and this time, he could feel the strain in his muscles, the growing fatigue of maintaining the lightning coursing through his legs. He gritted his teeth, pushing through the exhaustion. A thundering fist should be devastating, not just pushing a beast back. The realization stung. He was failing to channel the true essence of the technique, unable to draw out the full power that should have existed behind each strike. His movements slowed, and the rat sensed it, lunging with renewed ferocity. And as its claws grazed his cheek, drawing a thin line of blood, Chen Ren's mind sharpened. He could feel the raw energy flickering within him, untapped and wild. I need to channel it, direct it, or this fight will end in blood. My blood. Chen Ren's mind raced, recalling the manuals he had painstakingly studied. Thundering Fist wasn't just about brute force. It was about control, about channeling the energy with precision, not letting it scatter wildly around his fists. Until now, he had merely been releasing bursts of electricity with each punch, the power dispersing before it could pierce through the target. The realization hit him like a jolt of his own technique. I need to focus on it, condense the energy into a single point, then let it explode. As the thought crystallized, he looked up to find the blood snout charging at him again, its bloodied eyes gleaming with fury that could have killed Chen Ren if it had power. But this time, he was ready. He sidestepped the creature's lunge with the speed of his lightning step, the world blurring for a split second as he vanished from its path. With a surge of energy, he propelled himself upward, leaping over the rat's gnashing teeth and clawed limbs. Twisting midair, he turned to face its exposed back, gathering the lightning into his palm. With a deep breath, he let the energy concentrate, feeling the charge intensify until his entire arm buzzed with barely contained power. The air around his hand crackled, the sound like a rumbling thunderstorm. Thundering Fist. He thrust his hand forward, releasing the technique in a blinding flash of blue and golden light. Electricity arced out, a condensed, crackling bolt that struck the blood snout directly in the back. A sharp, sizzling noise filled the air as the lightning surged through the beast's body, its muscles seizing violently. Then, with a sickening sound, a portion of its chest exploded outward in a spray of flesh and blood. The rat's shriek was cut short as its body crumpled to the ground, twitching before finally lying still. Chen Ren landed lightly, his feet crunching on the wet ground. He stared at his hands, electricity still sparking faintly from his fingers. Awe flickered in his eyes, but when he looked down and saw the blood and gore splattered on his palms and staining the edges of his robes, a wave of nausea hit him like a punch to the gut. He stumbled back, swallowing hard, and turned toward the nearby lake. Kneeling at the water's edge, he plunged his hands into the cold, clear water, scrubbing away the sticky remains with frantic motions. His stomach twisted, the taste of bile rising in his throat. He focused on the sensation of the water, trying to drown out the memory of the flesh peeling off under his attack. Yalan approached him, her steps soundless on the forest floor. She sat down gracefully by the lake, watching him. Her eyes were squinted in amusement as she licked her paw. I'd rate that a 4 out of 10. Chen Ren paused, water dripping from his fingers. 4 out of 10? Seriously? Why so low? He shot her an incredulous look, half expecting some sort of praise. Yalan flicked her tail, her expression unchanging. You took too long to figure out the proper way to use the technique. A lowly beast like that shouldn't have been able to push you so far. And then you nearly vomited at the sight of a bit of gore. How will you handle tougher beasts? Not to mention, you ruined the carcass. A blast like that makes it nearly inedible. Chen Ren blinked, turning to look at the mutilated rat's corpse lying by the water's edge. A shiver ran down his spine at the thought of eating something so grotesque. He glanced back at her, his expression incredulous. You would actually eat that thing? Yalan gave him a small, enigmatic smile. Of course. If you cook it, that is. Beast meat is often more nourishing than that of regular animals. And despite their unsavory appearance, these bloodsnouts live in the caves near lakes. They keep themselves clean in the waters. Chen Ren took another look at the bloody mess that was once the rat, its twisted body and vacant eyes staring into nothingness. He shuddered, the idea of roasting it turning his stomach once more. I think I'll pass, he muttered, stepping away from the remains as if they might spring back to life. Yalan only chuckled, her tail flicking in amusement. Suit yourself. But remember, next time, aim for the head. It makes for a cleaner kill. Chen Ren wiped the last of the blood from his hands and stood up, casting one more wary glance at the rat's mutilated corpse. With a deep breath, he turned his focus to the task that had originally brought him into the forest, gathering herbs. The moonlight filtered through the trees, illuminating the silver-green leaves of a plant he recognized. Its flowers had a faint blue hue, and as he reached down to pluck a few, he brought one to his nose, inhaling its soft, earthy scent. The fragrance was subtle yet refreshing, carrying a hint of sweetness. He found himself smiling, thinking, this would make a decent perfume. It was a strange thought amidst the chaos of battle, but he'd always been intrigued by the simple things. He tucked the herb carefully into his satchel, stretching his arms and rolling his shoulders. The tension of the fight melted away, replaced by a sense of relief. Well, that's that. Job's done for today, he muttered, stretching his limbs. As he turned to head back, Yalan's voice cut through the night air. And what about those spicy herbs you were talking about back at the tea stall? She glanced at him with a raised brow, her eyes glinting with curiosity. Chen Ren paused, then snapped his fingers as if just remembering. Oh, those aren't for perfume. I wanted to get those herbs to experiment with. Try turning them into a sauce. Yalan tilted her head, a curious expression crossing her feline face. A sauce? She echoed, as if tasting the unfamiliar word on her tongue. Chen Ren nodded eagerly, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice. Yeah, it's something you pour over food, like noodles, to give it more flavor. I think if I get the right balance of spice and seasoning, it could really take off. It might even be a hit in the city. Yalan's eyes narrowed as she considered his words. Spicy herbs? Those are usually burned around campsites to ward off beasts. I'm not sure how much of their heat humans can actually tolerate. She spoke matter-of-factly, her tail twitching as she gauged his reaction. Chen Ren laughed, shrugging lightly. That's why I need to experiment. Find the right blend, you know? But I haven't seen any of those herbs near the lake. He glanced toward the deeper, shadowy parts of the forest. According to what I've read, they grow deeper in, near a cliffside. I've also heard that stronger beasts roam around there, which, well, might be a problem. But I don't want to travel further tonight. I'm tired, and it's been a long day. Yalan arched her back, stretching gracefully as she looked up at him with a knowing smile. So, you want to keep up with your training then? Her tone held a playful challenge. Chen Ren glanced down at his fists, still tingling faintly with the lingering sensation of power coursing through them. He met Yalan's gaze and nodded slowly, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Yeah, I do. As gross as that fight was, it was fun too. There's a thrill in using my techniques, testing my limits. It's one thing to have power, but using it is a whole different matter. In the city, I can barely let loose. Yalan's smirk widened, and she padded closer, her tail swaying behind her like a pendulum. Good. Then I'll make sure to train you well. I wouldn't want my student to embarrass me by struggling with a mere rat beast again. Chen Ren rolled his eyes, but a hint of warmth seeped into his expression. Sure. Just don't push me too hard, or I might end up needing those herbs to treat my wounds instead of using it for cooking. Yalan's laughter echoed softly through the forest, a surprisingly melodious sound. Rest for now then. But don't think you'll be slacking off next time we're out here. With that, she turned and slinked away, disappearing into the shadows between the trees. He knew she wasn't going too far away, too used to having an eye on him always. Chen Ren exhaled, his smile fading into a thoughtful expression as he glanced deeper into the forest where the spicy herbs and greater challenges awaited. He'd have to face those soon enough, but tonight, he let the tension melt from his shoulders, savoring the cool night air. Tang Yuqiu sat at the large mahogany table in her room, her fingers tapping impatiently against the wood. Before her lay an open book of accounts, its pages filled with neat columns of numbers and records. She stared at them, but the contents seemed to blur together, refusing to hold her attention. With a frustrated sigh, she pushed the book away slightly. Lately, it seemed she couldn't concentrate on anything. Her mind was too restless, too caught up in something else. It wasn't just business either. Meals felt tasteless, and even the simplest pleasures like the morning walk through the garden held little appeal. Just a few days ago, her closest friend had invited her to a cozy tea stall where a popular novel was being recited. It was the kind of thing she would usually enjoy, but she had turned her down without a second thought. Why? Because Chen Ren had promised her something. A new product he'd spoken of with such conviction, insisting it would work wonders and become a sensation. But what was it, exactly? How was it supposed to work? He had never elaborated, and she hadn't thought to ask at the time, thinking he'd reveal it soon enough. Now, that curiosity had become a constant itch, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. Why hasn't he shown up yet? What could he possibly be doing that's taking so long? Her fingers stilled their tapping, and she muttered under her breath, "Is he not going to show up at all?" Frustration tightened in her chest, and she pressed a hand against her forehead, her brow furrowing deeply. "If he's tricked me again, I swear I'll have Father kick him out for deceiving me." The idea brought a bitter satisfaction, but beneath it, an unfamiliar twinge of disappointment. She hated feeling like she was waiting on someone, especially Chen Ren of all people. As she was caught up in her thoughts, a sudden knock at the door startled her. She straightened, smoothing her robes as her maid poked her head in. "Miss Yuqiu, young Master Chen Ren is here to see you." Tang Yuqiu's eyes widened in surprise. "Send him in, quickly." The maid nodded and withdrew, leaving the door ajar. A moment later, Chen Ren stepped into the room, his expression relaxed. At his hip, a small pouch was tied securely, its contents hidden but somehow intriguing. Tang Yuqiu's gaze immediately locked onto the pouch before flicking back to Chen Ren's face. "So, are you here with the product you promised?" she demanded, a hint of sharpness in her tone that masked the curiosity bubbling beneath. Chen Ren smirked slightly and gave her a nod. "Obviously. I wouldn't break a promise, would I?" His tone was casual, but there was a glint in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. Tang Yuqiu leaned forward slightly, her impatience returning tenfold. At last, she thought, trying to keep the eagerness from showing on her face. "Now, let's see what you've got up your sleeve, Chen Ren."
Okay, that's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please be so gracious as to like the video. If you really enjoyed the video, you might even subscribe to the channel. Farewell, and good luck on your journey through life.